Hey guys, this is Frank Yecker, and you're listening to Submission Radio.
Hey, this is Rich Franklin.
What's up, everybody? This is Chris Lieben. This is Diego Sanchez. Randy Couture.
Alistair Overeem. Hi, this is Stephen Bonner.
This is Don Fry.
Hey, I'm Phil, Mr. Wonderful Davis.
TJ Dillashaw.
You're listening to Submission Radio.
Submission Radio. Submission Radio.
Submission Radio.
You're listening to Submission Radio.
Welcome to another episode of Submission Radio. Dennis Shkratov here with Kasper Rosalowski on the 4th of December. Christmas is coming, but Christmas has come early because we have a big episode of Submission Radio for you guys this week.
Yeah, we got a big, sexy, juicy episode. Also, Christmas came, delivered a bit of a present to me. The gypsy flu. The damn gypsies have gotten me, and I'm dying here. I got the sweats. I got a blocked nose and all that kind of stuff. So apologies if I sound a little bit out of it this week. But yeah, like we mentioned, sexy guests this week. Some of them pre-recorded, but let's go through with who we have first. Ryan Bader stopping by Submission Radio. A lot of interesting things about Ryan Bader. What's going on with this free agency? Is he still in the UFC? Is he going to Bellator? A lot of questions for Ryan Bader. He is going to be first. Then, a couple of days ago, within the last 48 hours, we did a few interviews. Number one, Tim Kennedy. He's kind of like the man of the hour, if not the man of the week. The MMA Athletes Association is here. It dawned on us this past week, the big announcement. So we got Tim Kennedy to talk about that. A whole bunch of things, a whole bunch of questions for Tim Kennedy. And that's a juicy little interview. Cole Miller, another man who has been making the rounds this week, unhappy with some of the things happening in the UFC. We wanted to get Cole Miller on to discuss this story a little bit more than just a few minutes. Great interview on Sherdog, by the way, by Dave Mandel. But we've got about 20-something minutes with Cole Miller. And we spoke to him a couple of days ago, so that's a really interesting interview as well. Kind of heartbreaking a little bit as well. And Luke Thomas, we spoke to him as well a couple of days ago. Got his thoughts on Conor McGregor getting his boxing license, what exactly this means, as well as his reaction to the MMA Athletes Association. So there's a lot to discuss, and that's not even it. We've got more, don't we, Dennis?
That's right, Kasper. Honorary Submission Radio member Damon Martin is going to grace us with his presence later on in the program. We'll be breaking down the ridiculously crazy TUF 24 finale. So much to talk about from that, and also giving our thoughts on the association, what we think, how it's going to impact the world of MMA and all that. So that's later on in the show, so stick around because you won't regret it. And also, if you guys do get an opportunity, make sure to jump on, give us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn. We will really appreciate that kind of stuff. Really helps us jump up in the rankings. And we actually just love seeing you guys' feedback and seeing that you enjoy the program. So jump on, give us a review. We really appreciate it. And also, jump on Twitter, follow us at Submission AUS, jump on Facebook, like our page. We love chatting to our fans. You guys can message us through those outlets anytime. We love talking to you guys, love hearing your thoughts, love hearing your breakdowns, love hearing your reactions. But Cass, I mean, this is a big, big episode. Christmas come early. I think that's going to be the official tagline for this episode. We have our first man on the line, Ryan Bader, and I believe you're about to introduce him.
All right, guys. Our next guest is currently on a 2-fight win streak and coming off an insanely dominant victory over Antonio Rogério Nogueira at UFC Sao Paulo. He is the number 4th ranked light heavyweight, Ryan Darth Bader. Welcome back to Submission Radio. It's great to chat to you again, man. How are you?
Yeah, same here. What's going on? Great. What about you guys?
Oh, well, good now that we've got Mr. Bader back on the Submission Radio. It's been too long, man. And first off, we want to congratulate you on your win over Little Nog at UFC Sao Paulo. We know that since the Rumble Johnson fight, you've been focusing on just having fun and not really letting the pressure of rankings or climbing the ladder get to your head. Do you think that's one of the reasons why you're able to perform so well and be so dominant?
Yeah, I do. You got to the point where there for a couple fights, I was on a long win streak, where you're kind of like, all right, I want to reach my goal is to get a title shot, win the title, but I need to win this next fight, and I need to do it however I know how to do it, So kind of got in a mode of maybe taking less risks and all that kind of stuff. Where when I took that loss, I said, screw it, I'm going to go out there and have fun. That's when I fought my best. I'm not going to put as much pressure on myself, and I'm going to keep it light during fight week. So we're having fun during fight week. I'm not thinking about the fight the whole time, And so for me, it just kind of freed me up to go out there and just, take more risks and just go out there, and have fun and open up and not worry about things as much.
All right, well, Ryan, let's talk about the big story heading into your fight and also afterwards. You decided to fight out your UFC contract and become a free agent. As we speak, are you currently still a free agent, or have you signed any contracts?
No, I'm still a free agent right now. and over the next week or so, we're going to see kind of what what we're doing and whatnot, as far as if we're going to take any offers elsewhere, get an offer from the UFC, all that kind of stuff. So we haven't gone there yet. We're in the preliminary stages of it, so just kind of waiting right now. So we'll see what happens. So we're kind of waiting for that light heavyweight title fight to happen, but obviously that's pushed back. So we started the process a little earlier than expected.
Mm-mm. I'm curious, Ryan, with the negotiations, was it you or the UFC who are sort of waiting to offer you your next deal? Because a lot of people are talking about the fact that depending on what happens to the light heavyweight division, and what's going on with the rankings, you're a huge asset to the UFC, especially depending on how the fights play out, especially if DC beat Johnson once again, and that set up a potential DC Ryan Bader fight. Do you know if that's what sort of delayed the negotiation process a little bit?
No, it was they usually come to you with one fight left, so they offered us something to, for us it was just one of those things where we looked at it and said, well, we didn't really even counter. We just looked at it and said, we're going to fight it out, because it's pretty much the same contract as we had, a little bit more, so we just said, hey, why not? Let's just fight it out. So it was our decision, and so we're just in the process right now of just kind of figuring out what we're going to do.
I'm wondering, you're in the early stages, but have you had any other organizations reach out to you yet?
Without getting into specifics or anything like that, there's been interest for sure. I can't really talk too much about it, until stuff is all done and finalized and whatnot. But there's definitely interest out there. So, like I said, we're in the preliminary stages right now. We're kind of seeing, we're talking to the UFC. It's one of those things where, we get an offer from the UFC, or do we go out and test free agency? So we're in that stage right now.
Mm-mm. I'm curious, Ryan, because there seems to be a bit of a change in the landscape of MMA. I mean, we were talking to Luke Rockhold before. He did a similar thing to you, where he was unhappy with his contract. We see what's going on with the association, with the new Fighters Athletes Association, that the announcement was made. And, Tim Kennedy's on the show, Cole Miller's on the show this week. There's a real sentiment going around that fighters aren't just going to sort of take what's giving to them and sort of not speak back, but ask for a little bit more. You mentioned how that last offer wasn't really something that you guys thought was probably, the best. How long have you been sort of considering being a free agent? Was it when that offer came across your table, or even before that last fight came around and the UFC came to you? Were you already thinking about the possibility of becoming a free agent and testing the market after seeing what some of these other fighters were being able to do?
That's always there in your mind, especially when you see some other fighters go over, like your Ben Hendersons, your Rory McDonalds, and whatnot, and then going to other different organizations and people testing out, free agency, and even coming back, like Gil Melendez, and UFC was a right for that. So it's always there in your mind. So I'm not going to say that it wasn't there in my mind. It was just, we're under contract, and when you look at a 3-fight contract, 4-fight contract, it seems like a long time. But it snuck up on me because, I had the one with Ilir Latifi, and then got offered a short notice fight with Little Nog, and so it was 2 fights within 2 months there. So it was pretty quick turnaround, and so it happened sooner rather than later. And so obviously we were thinking about it. I was thinking about it going into the Latifi fight. And then afterwards, we knew what we were going to get offered pretty much. It was kind of a standard deal there, what they usually do, so we got the offer that we expected to get, and it was just one of those things where we said, well, it's just basically a continuance on my current contract. So, we're going to just fight it out and kind of see what goes on from there, and it wasn't necessarily like, all right, we're going to do this so we can leave the UFC. It was more so like, let's better myself a little bit. Let's see what happens, and either see what's out there or get a better contract going on.
And I mean, you betting on yourself, it seems like it would have paid off well, because you had a great performance against Little Nog. A lot of people sort of thought, it looks like a guy who's fighting like he's trying to get a bump in his contract and definitely deserves one. Just wondering, I know you're in the early stages, but have the UFC sort of gotten back to you since that fight? Have they offered you anything else, a new offer or contract?
Oh, not yet. I believe, we're dealing with that right now, and I believe yesterday he kind of asked for something, and so, we'll see. That's why I kind of said we're like real early in the preliminary stages of this whole process, and so we'll see what happens going into the next couple of days, because I believe yesterday he kind of asked him. So we'll see. I really don't know where I'm going to go from here as far as, if I'm leaving, if I'm staying. That depends. I gotta look at the numbers. I gotta see, where my heart is. It's not just all about money. There's some different stuff in there too. I've been with the UFC for since 2008. Even before that, filming Ultimate Fighter and whatnot. So we'll see. It's just one of those things that's real early right now, and but we just our contract out, and it was not for nothing. So we'll see what happens.
A lot of people talking about the fact that the light heavyweight division in the UFC is pretty sparse at the moment. I mean, up the top, you've got DC and Anthony Johnson. John Jones is on the fringe and coming back, but guys like Little Nog and Alexander Gustafsson and a lot of other guys in the division like Shogun, a lot of question marks around their name. Not many exciting new matchups, and a lot of people pointing to the fact that apart from a couple of other fighters, you're one of the biggest sort of prospects or stars in the division there for the UFC in the light heavyweight division as other fighters start to retire. I'm just curious, Ryan, have you looked at the division, and have you thought about your worth to the company from that standpoint?
Yeah, I have a little bit, and if you look at it, Gustin's been hurt. I don't know if it's he's got ongoing back injury or whatnot. And he's had these shots, he's had these title fights, and I don't know his record in his last 5 fights, but it's not that great, and you look at Anthony Johnson, he deserves a shot. You look at John Jones, who's out. And they've either fought DC or they've already been in there, and so Cormier even kind of said in a recent interview that we were going to fight either next year or whatever after their fight. So it's one of those things where it's new blood in there, and especially with DC there, we already have a little tussle and never got to finish something we started. And we were scheduled to fight one time, and he got pulled up to fight for the title, and I thought I was going to get a shot against him again, or a shot against him, and then Gustin got it. So there's a story there, and it's just one of those matchups that hasn't happened yet that should have happened. So, if he goes out there and wins it and keeps the title, I definitely see that as a new marquee fight, So, if you look back at the division, there's guys that are older in there. They've been in the sport forever, legends, but they're getting older. They're getting injured more and more, and so it's and you don't see a lot of new blood coming in.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned before about how, some of the things that are important to you, it's not just about money. It's, obviously the fact that you've been in this sport and in the UFC for so long. I'm also wondering, is UFC gold still as important to you as it's always been? Because, we see a lot of fighters moving away from that as a priority in favor of, say, bigger paychecks, ways to provide for their family and, earn what they feel like they deserve. And, in general, I think a lot of fighters these days, they sort of seem a little bit disillusioned with the pursuit of a UFC title.
Yeah, I can see that, and I see what you're saying. UFC title used to be something where there's a clear path of what you had to do to go earn the title shot and whatnot. Now it's kind of up in the air. You have guys that are ranked number 13 getting title shots, guys that are getting title shots off of knockout losses in their last fight. You're getting random people just thrown in based on popularity or their following or who they want to put in there. So. It's just one of those things where it's the sport I come from in wrestling. We have a bracket, or if you played football, and you're in the playoffs. If you win, you move on in the bracket, and until you finally are in the finals, and then you become champion if you beat that other person in that finals. And so, but it's not like that. It's more kind of an entertainment deal now. So I can see even for me that it's lost that that luster a little bit, so it's not. I'm not 100%. I get the question a lot. Will you be disappointed if you never get UFC title? And my answer is no. I've had a great career, and I going to continue to have a great career. I've been around the world. You know, I've fought in front of new markets, new people, new countries, and all that kind of stuff. And so right now, it's more of when I was saying I was going out there and have fun. It's more of that mindset of going out there, yes, getting a better paycheck, going out there and having fun, you know, having bigger fights and not worrying about it as much. And that's when I fight my best and I can be more entertaining, which in turn, you know, will garner you that title shot and whatnot. So I'm just kind of keeping my head down and looking at it, you know, approaching it a little differently.
It's interesting how you mention that, because obviously you were on a huge win streak. A lot of people pegging you to get a title shot. You lost the fight to Anthony Johnson, but a lot of people suggesting you could have gotten a title shot before that. So I'm wondering, Ryan, when you look back at your time in the UFC, I mean, you won the Ultimate Fighter, you've done so much with the company, but were there also points of frustration where they really could have pushed you and given you that title shot and not made you have to fight after fight after fight after fight and giving you that push like they did other fighters? And is there any sort of frustration with that, the fact that you never really kind of got that shot?
Yeah, you do. You do have some frustrations there, you know, and you know, it is what it is. I wish, you know, things worked out differently and I got a title shot after, you know, the winning streaks and all that kind of good stuff. But I'm not one to look back and dwell on it. That's why I've always bounced back on my losses and say, screw it, let's move on and go forward. And so that's kind of where I'm at. There's times, yeah, you look back and you feel slighted here or there for 100%.
I'm wondering, UFC obviously took a major blow, and you mentioned this before, when the main event between DC and Rumble fell apart. Did the UFC contact you at all about potentially filling in for Cormier, or did you put your hand up for the Rumble rematch in any way?
They didn't contact me. I told my manager to put her name in, you know, if the money was right or whatnot, you know, and it's different than going in there and just saying, yeah, I'll take a fight when you're under contract. You know, we would have to work out a whole new contract and, you know, make sure I was happy, not with only that fight, but the fights going forward after that and whatnot. You'd have to negotiate, you know, to go in there and win the interim title if that was the case, or a regular title, where you go from there. And so there's a lot of work to be done, you know, and I told the manager to do that, and he kind of got back to me and said they were talking to Musasi, and then that AJ was going to wait for Cormier.
I mean, you've been a guy that's been chasing the belt for a long time. I'm just wondering, what did you think of the whole situation where the fallout of the DC Rumble fight essentially led to a championship belt being taken away to make room for an interim title fight in order to supplement a pay-per-view card? Were you a fan of this move that the UFC did?
Now, what was it again? I'm sorry.
So Conor McGregor's title got taken away basically, and now Aldo versus Holloway is for the interim title, while Aldo is the champion. What did you think? What did you think about the UFC making that move to sort of make sure that this pay-per-view event gets decent numbers now that DC and Rumble was off the card?
Gotcha. I didn't know they were on that card. Yeah, you know, I mean, it is what it is. I mean, they're entertainment business, and they're going to go in there and try to make those pay-per-views strong. You know, I don't know. You know, he goes in there. McGregor went in there, won two titles at two different weight classes. You know, and it wasn't like it was a split decision or anything like that. So that, you know, that one's a little tough. You know, especially when there's other champions out there that, you know, haven't defended their belt in as long or longer time than he has. You know, so you know, I'd be pissed if I were McGregor, but at the same time, you know, there's a lot of people vying for those spots. You know, there's a lot of guys that deserve to be fighting for those spots too. And if you're defending two different weight classes, it's going to take time. It just is what it is. You can't come back and defend two belts like that and prepare properly in the amount of time that they would want you to. You know, so I also see both sides of that. You know, because I also see the pack of fighters deserving to get a shot, you know, at 145 and at 155, you know.
Mm-hmm. Ryan, we got to get your thoughts on something that sort of shook things up in the MMA world a few days ago, and that was obviously the big announcement of the MMA Athletes Association. You got guys like, you know, GSP and Tim Kennedy and TJ Dillashaw and Bjorn Rebney, Cowboy Cerrone, Cain Velasquez. I think that's all the guys, but what do you think about this MMA Fighters Association? You know, this is the third big one now in sort of a recent while. What was your reaction? I mean, especially being a guy who's sort of, in the middle of discussing contracts and what he's worth and things like that. How did that sort of resonate with you?
Yeah, when I first saw it, I'm actually good friends with Cain Velasquez. I didn't know he was part of the association or anything, but my first reaction was, man, these are some big names. There's been other organizations or associations in the past that kind of popped up, but I don't feel like they ever got any traction. But this one looks like, it will, and you have a lot of big name guys in there, right off the bat, and it's one of those things. It needs to happen, sooner or later, it's inevitably going to happen. You have a lot of guys in this sport, and you're seeing it kind of now. I see it as far as being in the sport for 8-9 years and being in the UFC for 8 years, basically. That whole generation, it's usually a 10-year generation of fighters. You saw the early one going back to from the Ultimate Fighters and stuff when that first came on to kind of mine. We're looking at it like you're saying, like Cole Miller and all those kind of guys, the GSPs and whatnot. He's getting scanned even more so. But you're kind of seeing these guys retire and be at the end of their careers and kind of being unhappy because they don't have this, they don't have that, or whether it's a healthcare or some sort of retirement deal or little stuff, and so it needs to happen, and I believe it's a step in the right direction for sure.
Is that kind of one of the things that's one of your biggest, I don't know if I'd use the word concerns, but one of the things that you're trying to sort of take care of in this new contract, in this new deal, so that you don't end up like a lot of the other guys, like say Cole Miller, who's unhappy with his situation, and other fighters in the past who sort of have ended up with nothing?
Absolutely, and I'm one of those guys that's like right there in the middle. I make decent money, but I'm not making the champion money or anything like that, and I get that. If I was making 30 and 30, and I'm 33 years old, and I've had however many fights, 20 fights in the UFC, it'd be kind of daunting looking at it, as a something that I could keep up, and so it's definitely one of those things. And there are guys like that. There's guys out there that have 20 fights that are making that kind of money, even 40 and 40. It might sound like a lot of money to some of the listeners, but when you have to pay everything out, and then realize that you got to start over once you're done fighting, and for me, I want to get out of MMA completely when I'm done. When I'm done and I don't have the heart for it anymore, I don't want to go into coaching or anything like that. So I'm gonna have to start over doing something else because I get burned out here and there. I still love to compete, I still love to train and whatnot, but there'll come a time when I want to be totally done, and so you got to set yourself up for sure. So that's definitely one of the reasons why I'm looking at, basically just looking at my options. It got to a point where it's kind of taboo and everything now to fight your contract out and see what you're worth, because we kind of had that pressure put on us throughout our, our whole career, and UFC kind of puts that pressure on you a little bit. So yeah, all I'm doing is just fighting it out, seeing what I'm worth, and just like anybody else, like any other athlete in any other sport, and so, but it's done a little bit more now, but it used to not get done at all. And when they did, everybody kind of gasped and said, oh man, so just kind of one of those weird things.
Just curious, Ryan, I mean, this may be a little bit ways sort of down the road, but you mentioned that when you do eventually retire, that you want to get out of MMA completely. Have you sort of had that thought about what you would potentially do? Because a lot of people sort of wonder, like, once an MMA fighter retires, what are sort of the options? A lot of people kind of think, well, they'll get into something sports related, or they'll be a coach, or they'll own a gym. Have you sort of, and this may be daunting, but have you had that thought of like, well, what do I do if I don't have enough money to completely retire and just sort of live off my savings, etc., and earnings from MMA? What would I do?
No, I'm already starting that. I have it going already. We have a big gym here in Gilbert, basically Phoenix, Arizona. It's 25,000 square feet. Got a lot of stuff going on here. I have another business. Little plug here. It's a nootropic shot. It's doing really well. We're in about 3,000 stores, convenience stores in the country. It's called Juby. A little plug here, tryjubi.com, TRYJUBI. That's we started that, and that's doing really well. And so I'm just getting into different stuff, and we're coming out with more lines on that aspect. And so I'm already doing that. I'm not one of those guys that likes to sit around and, I go to the gym and then I go home and nap. I go to the gym, I get my training in the morning, I go to our office, I do what I need to do, I come back, I train, for my second and third training of the day, then I go home and have 3 kids. I always like to be busy and doing stuff. So I'm setting it up now, so those 2 things are doing really well, and I plan to just continue being an entrepreneur and getting into different things.
Yeah, exciting times, Ryan. I mean, people need to check out your new business. It sounds very good. I just want to quickly circle back to when you said Cain was a friend of yours when you found out about the association. Do you anticipate that you might give him a call just to find out a bit more information about this? Because during the conference call, I think a lot of fighters said that not enough information was sort of explained. They skimmed over a lot of different parts. Do you anticipate yourself giving him a call just to see what exactly this whole thing's all about?
Yeah, for sure. It's scary for fighters because you look at it and you go, okay, it's great. We have, those big names in there, and we're starting this conversation. We're starting this whole deal. But, what's going to happen? What's going to happen going forward? What's your plans? What actions are you going to put into play here? What's the first step? What's the second step? What are you guys trying to get out of it? Things like that. Are you trying to gather fighters and what's going to, basically what's going to be the play, how are you going to get this accepted? Basically when it really boils down to is how are you going to get that accepted by, basically the UFC, and so, I know it's just getting people on board and all that, but I'd love to hear the steps on that plan.
All right, Ryan. Well, look, as we let you go, and by the way, it's been fantastic chatting with you. As we let you go, what's sort of the rough time frame? Because a lot of fans are wondering, what exactly is going on with you? When will we sort of gain clarity on sort of where you're going, whether you stay in the UFC, or whether you're, really going to sort of get deep into the free market? When do you sort of foresee this sort of being completely resolved? Are we waiting till after the title fight? What's sort of the time frame?
No, I would say before that. They don't even know when the title fight's going to happen, so I'm not waiting that long, So what we're going to do is we're going to go see what the UFC wants to do, what they kind of want to offer. If not, we'll ask to be kind of released from the kind of low waiting period so we can go get our, offers elsewhere and bring them back and see if UFC wants a match or whatnot. So I would hope this be resolved by, sometime before January, or at least January sometime. So I'm hoping sooner rather than later.
Wow. Well, I guess we'll be penciling in another chat with you soon and finding out what the latest is. Any chance that with a newly signed contract and a step in an exciting new direction, you'll be finally announced as Ryan Masturbator? I know we've talked about that a lot of times, Ryan.
I know. I need to do it. I'll do it sometime. I told you once before my career ends, I'll get it in.
All right, just checking that the promise is still valid. Guys, there you go. Don't forget to follow him on Twitter and Instagram at Ryan Bader. A lot of fun stuff going on there. We all remember the incident where your four-wheeler essentially blew up in the desert. So there's a lot of reasons to check that out. Ryan, we really appreciate you taking the time to come over and chat with us. We always love chatting with you. And as we let you go, feel free to give another plug to your Great Nootropics business.
Yeah, it's TryJubi. It's TRYJUBI. It helps with stress relief, but it also helps with focus. So it dials you in, will take away any stress, makes you feel like the man or the woman, get stuff done. So check that out.
Hi, this is Connor Nelson, and you're listening to Submission Radio.
All right, guys. Our next guest was originally supposed to fight at UFC 205 against Rashad Evans. Left without an opponent, the UFC moved the fight to UFC 206, where it fell apart once again. However, all is right with the world as he is now fighting Kelvin Gastelum at UFC 206 as the last-minute opponent. The man with possibly one of the longest training camps to date, a deadly weapon when he's not fighting. He's hunting Hitler. Tim Kennedy, welcome back to Submission Radio.
Hello. Sorry I didn't get to fight at 205.
That's okay. We enjoyed spending time with you. We had some good times in the hotel room and got to check out your knives, and you even tied my shoelaces. So how could we complain?
Yeah, you're welcome for that.
Yeah,
Safety first.
Yeah, our videographer still can't sleep straight because you came out of the bathroom and pulled a knife on him, but that's okay. That's okay. Sleep is for the weak. What a busy period it must be for you at the moment, man. I mean, before we even get to your fight and UFC 206, got to jump into the big MMA Fighters Association announcement that was made a few days ago by you and such fighters as Donald Cerrone, GSP, TJ Dillashaw, Bjorn Rebney, and Cain Velasquez. Before we discuss this news, tell us exactly how did you get approached to be a part of this and how long have you known about it?
Oh, man. So I got approached to be part of it maybe about 2 years ago. And I've wanted to be part of something like this forever, for 10 years. And it was just about looking and finding the right opportunity with the right group, with the right motivation, at the right time.
What a time it is to do it. I mean, for people who didn't hear the conference call, the new association will be called the Mixed Martial Arts Athletes Association. Yourself, GSP, DJ Dillashaw, Cerrone, Cain Velasquez are all on board, while Bjorn Rebney is just an advisor. For those who missed out on the call or are still a little bit confused, explain how exactly will it work and how does it stand apart from the Professional Fighters Association and the Mixed Martial Arts Fighters Association?
I think the biggest difference is the group, the team, the panel that has been put together to make sure that this is executed at the highest level for the right reasons. Our goal, our mission is to be able to provide protection and compensation for the athletes. It's not to line our pockets. It's not to get an easy buck from money that might be sitting there from the UFC's recent sale. This is to protect athletes and to protect athletes that have fought, that are currently fighting, and that will in the future fight. So, in one day after the announcement, we garnered more, in the analytics strategically, like the size of the website, the amount of people that visited, the new followers that we have on our Twitter page, or like the number of fighters that we have that are part of the association, in one day surpassed all of the other efforts combined for their entirety of existence.
Wow.
So, the question is like, why aren't you part of the Fighters Association, or, a litigation of a class action lawsuit that has been around for 5 years now, 4 years. This is about changing and making a difference now and then moving forward. So like this isn't something that's going to be that we're going to wait around for 5 years to hopefully get an out of court settlement to, or even go in and face, the UFC in court. That's not what's happening here. We are here to gather all of the athletes together, understand what their voice is, understand how powerful their voice is, and then affect change positively, so that fighters aren't living in poverty with broken bodies and broken brains.
I mean, with these sort of beginning stages, and we really wanted to ask you this because a lot of fighters have come out, and I think majority of fighters are super excited about this. Some fighters have come out and said, look, I wish there was more information about what's happening. With these sort of beginning stages, what are the main goals for the association to achieve, and how soon could we start seeing these differences being implemented? Obviously, you're saying you want to take action immediately. What is sort of the rough timeline for when we might see the first sort of, something you can point to and say, hey, this is change. We did this right now.
So the first goal is and what we will be doing over the course of the next 6 weeks is every week we'll be announcing, not a new batch of supporters, but the group of fighters that have aligned with the Mixed Martial Arts Athletes Association. We already have, I have literally hundreds of more people I need to return calls from yesterday. Text messages, Twitter direct messages, emails. I'm in fight camp. I'm 11, 12 days away from my fight. So, some of those calls are going to happen after my fight. Some of those calls I'm handing off to other board members. But in one day, I'm supposed to pretty much call back or contact 100+ UFC athletes that are saying, hey, I want to be part of this. So what you're going to see over the course of the next 6 weeks is attention to who these athletes are, what their stories are, why they want to be part of this. You're also going to see stories of retired fighters or fighters that are in the twilight of their career that are looking, bleakly at what their future looks like. Guys that are hurt, guys that are broken, guys that are damaged. If you look at the Don Fries and the Mark Colemans, it's a scary, sad thing. It's something we don't want to look at. It's things that fans don't want to see or talk about. Let's just watch what happens in the octagon, on next Saturday night. I love the sport. I love the fight. I love the thrill and the excitement of it. But we need to be realistic and understand the repercussions of what the sport does to the humans that are in the octagon at the time and what it does to their body and their brains in the future.
Now, Tim, people have been a little bit skeptical about Bjorn Rebney being a part of the project, even as an advisor, due to some negative rumors surrounding him from how difficult he was to deal with back in his time in Bellator. Others are saying he's just trying to get back at Dana White, with whom he's had a lot of back and forths when he was running Bellator. I'm wondering, how did he become a part of this, and what was it about him that made you believe that he'd be the right man for the role?
We had to have somebody that understood the promoter perspective. We needed the intimate details of what the negotiations are like on the promoter side. When you're negotiating with an agent and a manager, with an agency, a firm, with contractual lawyers, when you're talking to vendors from different venues, when you're trying to make an agreement with the venue, when you're talking to, different apparel lines, different sponsors, different, ticket wholesalers, from providing content, digital content online. Like, these are all things, even though the group of guys that are board members know the sport, champions, former champions, longest standing champions, marquee, no-name fighters, like, guys that coach Ultimate Fighter. It is still, there's the other side we don't know. So it's kind of a necessary evil. We have to have that perspective. And Bjorn is that perspective. We can't do it without him. We can't do it without a guy like that. And, I don't know if he's trying to right mistakes, wrongs that he did as a promoter. That's his personal, position or demons, or that's up to him. What I know is that his heart is in the right place. I know that he is trying to do the right thing. And maybe for the first time in his professional career, he is trying to, with everything that he has, at every resource that he has, take care of fighters. Maybe as a promoter, he was doing his job the best that he could. And in some cases, that is taking advantage of fighters. That is creating a bottom line for Viacom. That is providing content, exciting content. But he knows, we'll call it the dark side. He knows the dark side very, very, very well. But right now, he is 100% on board to supporting this board and supporting what we want to do. And ultimately, we're the ones that will do and choose everything. We have all the power. We're the ones that make all the decisions. When it comes down to a vote, if ever get out of the room, he's out, and we talk about it. But he knows, and he is that expert that will provide that contrasting information about what the promotion side looks like. He knows the business.
Another sort of question that people have been wondering about and trying to figure out is, where is the money going to come from to fund this whole the whole association? Obviously, I know a lot of you guys will be doing work voluntarily, but will there be financial backers? And if so, are there any financial backers at the moment? Are you guys figuring out a way to get that money coming in? What's the plan for that?
Yes, we already have financial backers, but there's not a lot of financing to be done. Really, it's about communicating with other athletes. If you look at the guys that are on the table, you have Team Alpha Male, you have AKA, you have Jackson's, you have TriStar, You have the BMF Ranch. You know, ATT is missing. You know, Rufus is missing. King's MMA is missing. But just right there, you have 5 of the biggest gyms in the sport, and 5 of maybe the 8 or 9 mega gyms in the entire world. And we go back to I got back to the gym today, and right away talking to fighters. People had questions, ones that aren't co-located with me during fight camp. So what expenses you're talking about, we flew in yesterday on our own dimes to have these conversations, to make announcements. We're on a telephone. We didn't rent a boardroom to do a press conference. I'm a very, very frugal person. Bjorn is a very, very frugal person. GSP is a brilliant businessman that has been so overwhelmingly successful financially, both from fight reasons, but also what he's done outside of the cage. He's made millions. Cain, also very frugal. Cowboy, oh my God, you don't even know what that guy. So we are doing this economically because it's not about the money. It's about the fighters. It's about taking care of fighters. It's about taking care of damaged brains, damaged bodies. It's about the future fighters that are going to be coming in, guys from the Ultimate Fighter that are looking at 8 fight contracts that they're promised pennies to get their brains bashed in. So the initial money backers, they're remain anonymous. But they 100% support the heart of what this is. And they get it. They're fight fans. They've been to the biggest live events, and they're like, oh my God, these guys put it out there, and they need to be protected. They're heroes, right? Right now, to me, they're heroes because they're getting this ball rolling.
For sure. And I mean, on that note of getting the ball rolling, you look, one of the things that stands out about this association compared to the others is you have these massive marquee names, guys who have been really successful in the sport, and it's kind of the guys that you really need to head and front this kind of thing. But I'm wondering, how does it end up that you've got these, 5 big names, yourself and Cain and TJ and GSP and Cowboy? Like, was it Bjorn that came up to you guys? Because he sounds like a guy who's sort of, he's an advisor. And on the phone call, you sort of seemed like you were leading it in a lot of ways. Who sort of came up with the idea and said, hey, guys, let's sort of do this? Who was it that took the initiative and sort of got all of you guys together?
I don't. There's not even a single person. Like Cain wanted this, TJ wanted this, Cowboy wanted this, I wanted this. And there's like 20, 30 other people that were already on board fighter-wise that wanted to be part of it. So we had to pick kind of people that were strategically located, in what gyms they trained at, where they were in their careers. We didn't want everybody to be active fighters. We didn't want everybody to be champions. We didn't want it had to be what we thought to be a good representation of the athletes. And then also, and this, I'm not bad mouthing the UFC, but we also had to have guys that had nothing to lose. Like you can't hurt GSP, Cowboy's courage in the cage and how he has competed from fighting 27 times in a year to stepping in on 2 days' notice to fighting up weight classes to down weight classes. He is beyond reproach, and he's a plain shooter. He is a plain speaker. He's a truth teller. Cain Velasquez exactly the same way. My life financially exists outside of the UFC. I fight because I want to be a champion, and so that group of guys are successful outside of MMA as well, from TV shows to commercials, with massive social reach. That having the right guys at the right time for the right reasons took some finagling, but strategically, those the current 5 board members were picked for all of those reasons.
Let's discuss what happens if the UFC decide to completely ignore your requests as an association. I mean, during the conference call, Bjorn mentioned the possibility of a labor strike. Is there any kind of chance that we could see a strike happen one day in the future if the association isn't taken seriously?
I saw like a bunch of bait click articles that populated immediately after he talked about it. And that's not what he said. He said, in industries like ours, the worst fear in the world is labor, is the people. And that, in this case, it's the fighters and the athletes. So, no, we were not threatening. We weren't even hinting at that. That is not what this is whatsoever. That is their worst fear, as it has been for baseball and basketball and football and freaking soccer. You know, like this is that is their worst fear. So those cards aren't even being discussed at any level with any board member right now. Like I promise, like we haven't been like, oh yeah, collectively, let's all, get all the marquee names here. That's not mentioned right now. Our focus is to build the momentum to be able to positively affect change financially and protection for the athletes. And we have a very clear plan about how that's going to happen.
I mean, one of the things GSP spoke about and brought up was the fact that a lot of agents and fighters will be threatened by the UFC. We've got to ask, have you had any kind of conversations with the UFC since? Have they reached out to you? Have they said anything? And are you expecting to have some when you fight at UFC 206?
You mean in the past 22 hours?
Yeah.
No. When nobody's talked to anybody, we all flew home to our respective fight camps and got back to fight camp. And that's like, that's it. I'm fighting at UFC 206. So I've already done 2 workouts. I have a 3rd workout here in about 3 hours. And I'm just trying to recover between those workouts. So I haven't been getting on the phone to anybody yet.
Just curious, because a lot of people are wondering, what about the fighters outside the UFC, the fighters in Bellator, World Series of Fighting, or the fighters who had fought in the UFC previously? How exactly does this all work for those fighters? Is it a situation where they, at the moment, can't be a part of the association, or can they be a part of the association anyway? Just for people who listen to the conference call but still have a few questions around that topic.
They shouldn't. We were very clear on the conference call. You have to have fought for the UFC to be part of the association. Just like in baseball, there's plenty of different leagues and farm leagues, but you have to play for the pros to be part of the players union. It's the exact same here. Had you fought for the UFC and you're in a different organization, you fought for the UFC and now you've retired, there are a lot of different ways. We made our announcement yesterday. So the infancy of this is real. We have a plan, and we're in the process of executing that plan very, very, very strategically, but it is still coming to fruition. Now, does that mean in a few years from now, we're going to be talking with World Series of Fighting or Legacy or Bellator? Absolutely. But maybe. I don't know. Right now, we are completely focused on UFC and former UFC athletes.
All right, well, this is all very exciting, and Tim, we really appreciate the time. We could talk to you forever, but we've got a few questions regarding your matchup at 206, so we'll get those in before we let you go. Got to ask you about this training camp. I mean, we were there with you in New York where you had to make weight just a couple of weeks ago. Talk to us about how hard it's been continuing the training camp, which must feel, never-ending going through to UFC 206.
I mean, it's a long fight camp. After the fight fell through in New York, I pretty much moved immediately into, they were insinuating that I would be fighting at UFC 206. So I started working that angle and preparing for those fights pretty much right away. So, fight camp is exactly what it should be. And I'm feeling good.
Wow, how about that? That's crazy. I mean, you have to release some secrets as to how to do such a long training camp. We want to ask you about Kelvin Gastelum as a matchup. I know you were very excited in fighting Rashad Evans. It was a fight a lot of people are really looking forward to. What was your reaction when you found out you'd be fighting Gastelum instead, who is a well-known fighter, a tough fighter, but not really someone who's held in high regard in the middleweight division, primarily because he fights in the welterweight division? What did you think when the UFC gave you him as the last-second opponent switch?
It's not last second. He and I I was asking for him at UFC 205, and I was aware that that he was kind of a backup fighter for UFC 206 in the event that Rashad couldn't fight. So even in New York, we are already watching fight tape on Gastelum. So I'm very, very excited and prepared for this fight. He's a tough guy. He's an underappreciated, underrated, very durable, very tough, hard to knock out, hard to submit. Powerhouse with his hands, great wrestling. If you look at his record right now, he's like 15-2 or something. I don't even know, with his 2 losses being very close split decisions. He's a real deal.
I mean, obviously we're excited for the matchup, and you're speaking about Gastelum in very high regard, but is it a bit of a sort of weird situation? Because when we originally spoke to you, spoke about the reason you're coming back to MMA was because it's Rashad Evans, it's in New York, it's this big monumental event, and this matchup, while it's going to be a great fight, it's not quite the way you described it at all. I'm wondering, how does this sort of fit into your trajectory and your plan as far as staying as an active fighter? And is there a possibility that after this fight, as you've discussed previously, we may not see you as an active fighter again?
I'm one fight at a time. This is not the fight. This is not the event. This is not the venue that I came back to the sport for. But I got to the sport, and I'm not going to have done what is now a 3-month fight camp for no reason. You want to talk about blue balls. That's it right there. I don't want anything to do with that. I'm gonna go out there, do exactly what I've been training to do for the past 3 months, which is be the best version of myself that I've ever prepared for.
When we spoke to you in that hotel room in New York, there was a little bit resentment towards Kelvin for missing weight and costing your friend and teammate Cowboy Cerrone the fight, UFC 205. How do you feel about him going into this fight? Is there still some resentment after that situation, or is it something that you put behind you?
Resentment was never a word I used. His behavior has been unprofessional. That hasn't changed. So that's his problem. That's not my problem. It's not like I'm gonna hold a grudge against him or I'm gonna fight any differently, because he didn't make weight for Cowboy's fight or any of the other fights he hasn't made weight for. That's has nothing to do with me. I am focused on what I'm supposed to do, and hopefully he'll make 185 pounds. If that doesn't happen, then it'll affect me, and that'll be a different story. We're professional athletes. Being professional means we're gonna show up on time, we're gonna step on the scale, we're gonna make weight, then we're gonna go in and put on a great show. That's what I'm gonna do, and I hope he's there to participate.
All right, well, this is going to be exciting because you're gonna be able to relieve these MMA blue balls when you step in the cage against Kelvin Gastelum. How do you see it going down? You said you've already been watching tape. How do you think you do it? What's the official prediction, Tim?
I think he's gonna. I don't think you want to rest. I don't know what he's gonna do. I don't care. I think I can knock him out. I think I can beat him up on our feet. I think I'm the better kickboxer. He's younger, and I think he's going to think he's younger and faster. And that's not the case. I have more tools, and I think honestly I can beat him anywhere.
Well, there you guys. Going to be an exciting fight, UFC 206. Make sure to follow Tim on Twitter @TimKennedy MMA and watch him on the new season of Hunting Hitler airing on the History Channel. You can go on the History Channel website to watch clips and see when the new episode is airing and re-airing in your time zone. Tim, I've been watching the new season. It's been great, so I can't wait to see what next week's episode brings. One of the most busiest men in MMA. Make sure to contact him if you're a professional fighter from the UFC listening to this program to ask him more about the Athletes Association. Tim, as always, thank you so much for your time and best of luck over in Canada for UFC 206.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate it, and catch you guys later.
Hey, everybody, this is Tyron, the Chosen One Woodley. You are listening to Submission Radio.
Well, guys, this is a real pleasure. Our next guest is making his first appearance on Submission Radio. UFC veteran. He's been a long-time fan favorite, fighting in his first UFC event at the TUF Fight finale in 2007. He now returns at UFC on Fox 22. A big fan favorite in the game. Cole Miller, welcome for your first time on Submission Radio. It's a pleasure to have you on the program.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here with you guys.
You're a guy who we wanted on the program for a very long time, so it really is great to have you. I mean, we know it's been a couple of tough months for you with your fight being cancelled in Manila and now having to do 2 training camps back to back. I mean, give us the update. How is everything going?
I mean, the training is going okay. I can't say that I'm, going into these training sessions with the greatest of moods. But as far as like results are concerned, I'm training pretty good.
Well, we saw in your interview with Sherdog, as a longtime veteran of the game and someone who's respected by other fighters, people were shocked to find out how frustrated you were with everything that has happened in relation to getting a third of your show money and having to do 2 back-to-back camps. Was this the first time you were frustrated with the UFC in your almost 10 years with them, or was this just the tipping point for you?
It was less than a third of my show money.
Oh, wow.
A third. It was less than a third. But yeah, this was kind of just like the tipping point. I've had some things that were frustrating me that have been kind of building up for a little while, but nothing that was like this. Some of those things were that there's like 2 sides to the coin. You know what I'm saying? So like maybe I was just kind of down because of a loss or something like that I might have been frustrated, which is why there was I didn't maybe voice any frustrations in the past, because honestly I haven't had any real issues with the UFC until this point.
So talk to us about sort of the crux of the situation. The tipping point, obviously you're getting less than a third of your show money and it's 2 back-to-back camps. What is, if you can sort of sum it up, what is the big frustration? Is it just time wasted? Is it your career on standstill? Is it the way this whole situation's been handled? What is sort of the most frustrating part for you?
Well, it was, look at it like this. I put 9 weeks of training in, and this isn't like training like lifting and hitting pads. I mean, like, I am sparring or grappling with other human beings, and you're chipping away at your body, right? So not only am I putting my body and my mind at physical risk, but after that 9 weeks, you put all that time in, and then you find out that you're just going to be getting a couple $100. I mean, because that's what that's what I netted. I netted like $400 or $500 after all that time that I had spent away from my family. And then right after that point, they tell you that you're going to fight. And I'm like, cool. All right, I'm just going to try to, stay motivated, probably fight in a couple weeks, right? Wrong. Some of these guys that were on that card, they got booked straight away, but I got pushed back a full 2 months back, which is another full training camp. So now there's two parts of that. Now I got to put my body and my mind through that same, that chopping block. And it's chipping away. And, and I'm doing that, and I have to do two full training camps for the price of one. That's already pretty messed up. But then you take into the fact that if I got injured, I can't even say that if I did get injured, there'd be no way for me to pull out. Because at this point, you're just having to like literally stay in it to provide for yourself and your family, because you didn't get compensated for the event that was canceled. It's not like I pulled out. You know what I'm saying? That event got canceled, and it wasn't my fault. It was not to say that it was the UFC's fault. That was just the call that they had to make. They had to cancel the event, but I'm over here left taking all the risk and taking all the heat from that.
Well, we noticed a couple of days ago you tweeted out, "This sounds too good to be true. I'd break down and cry if I had any emotion left for the game," at Tim Kennedy and Cowboy Cerrone in relation to the announcement of the new Mixed Martial Arts Athletes Association. I mean, it almost seems like this association came together almost perfectly in time with your frustrations. Tell us a little bit about why this is such a big deal for yourself and how you first reacted when you found out this was happening.
No, it's good. They're talking about things that should have already been talked about for quite some time. I can't say that I endorse the MMAAA because I don't know enough about it. I know that I like what they said, but I encourage I have to say this, that I encourage all fighters to do their research, to speak to the board members, to speak to the attorney that is representing the MMAAA, and ask thorough questions. If you are unclear about something, don't just listen to the answers and then move on. Make sure that you get clarity in every question that you may have, and you fully know what it is that you're saying that you're behind before you endorse. And that's not a slight or a knock on the MMAAA, but that's just saying that you should know. You should be thorough. You should know what it is that you're signing, because there's that other or associations, the PFA and the MMAAA, you know what I'm saying? So fighters that are out there that are both young in the game and veterans, they shouldn't just because something sounds good or because these guys are fighters, they shouldn't just jump on it. They should be thorough and take their time and develop an educated decision and verify what it is that's being said.
Right.
But for me, I'm sorry to cut you off. I like the way it sounds. For me, when I got in the game, my biggest hope was that when I was done, that there would be something in place like post-career healthcare and pension benefits that would be based on tenure for these athletes. That it would, be something similar to the pensions and the benefits post-career that the NHL, the NBA, the Major League Baseball, and these other major sports associations have.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say what you're saying makes a lot of sense about, doing your own research and finding out exactly what it is that you're getting into. I'm wondering if you've sort of had the chance to do that, and I know this is very fresh, but if not, is that something you're sort of planning on doing?
Yeah. I mean, for sure, I texted Tim Kennedy yesterday when I saw the conference. I listened in on the conference call, so I texted Tim Kennedy and let him know that I have lots of questions, and he said that he would make some time and do his best to answer those questions for me. And I have not gotten that call or scheduled an official time for that call, but I like the way it sounds, but I can't say that I'm behind that, but I am behind what they're saying. I do like what they're saying. I just have a lot of questions as far as like the method of plan of attack. I'm not, maybe attack isn't the right word, but their plan. What is it that they're trying to accomplish and how they're trying to accomplish that? I know that they said that, a lump sum settlement, for, athletes, that were in the past, along with the other thing was post career benefits and such. And one question I have is the lump sum for the athletes of the past, but the post-career thing, is that also for those athletes? You know what I'm saying? Like the Carlos Newtons and the Jens Pulvers, et cetera. You know what I'm saying? Like that would be good to know, like more specifics.
It's interesting because when you spoke to Sherdog in that now iconic interview that just happened last week, you mentioned how everything that's happened with you and the UFC has made you thought about quitting. And then in the previous tweet, you mentioned how you have no emotion left for the game. Just curious, Cole, where is your mind at the moment when it comes to the sport of MMA, and what keeps you going if you sort of have no emotion left for the game?
I mean, the martial artists that are in, mixed martial arts and at the elite level, fighting in the UFC and some of these other organizations, aside from, riches, fame, and fortune, whatever it is that they're in it for, they're going to find out. So for whatever purpose they're trying to get glory, or they're trying to, learn more about themselves, or they want to maybe just something simple as want to hit somebody in the face and hurt somebody, like whatever it is that they're in this for, they're going to find out, they're going to learn, so it's worth the fight. I don't regret, fighting in mixed martial arts or fighting in the UFC. I don't regret it at all. I learned everything that I feel that I needed to learn about myself. And I had some great moments of glory in there, and I had some hard defeats, and some of those defeats made me come back harder, and tested my mettle, so to speak. And I'm glad for those times. But but right now is an important time for, mixed martial artists that are in the game, both young and old, to be voicing what it is that they want out of, the sport in general, or, their specific organizations like the UFC, like the things that we're talking about, like post-career benefit. I mean, like, we can always say that we want more money, right? That's pretty easy, you can complain about what your contract is, or you can say that this guy's making this or that guy's making that. And that creates a lot of division. What we really need, if you want to do real work with a union or an association type thing, is we need more unity there. That's why it's called a union. So I think it's important to know that the system is set up for us to be fighting against each other, but really we're already going to be fighting against each other. We need to be fighting for each other when it comes to, the benefits, the respect, the ethical treatment, and things like that for fighters as a whole. Because just because you might not like a fighter, you don't like that they make more money than you right now, or they're getting pay-per-view cuts, or you're not, or you're making the lowest totem pole 10-10, but this other guy that came in for his debut made 50-50, and he just made his debut. That's trivial stuff. What the real stuff that we need to be talking about is, at least for me right now, that I'm thinking about, that I've been thinking about for a long time, that I'm hoping not for just myself, but fighters of the past, is the post-career amenities.
Mm-hmm. And these are obviously all important things that I think most people, if not everybody, has sort of believed that should be in MMA. I'm wondering, Cole, during that Sherdog interview, you explained how you attempted to have a meeting with the new UFC owners, but were denied. What exactly happened when you asked to meet with them, and what was the reason you used to stop?
No, I didn't ask to meet with the new owners. I specifically asked to meet with whoever was in charge of making the administrative decision of giving me the compensation that I received, and could give me a proper explanation on why I would receive that, and not, a penny more than that. And I offered to fly out, to Vegas on my own dime, pay for a hotel on my own dime, to just get, basically me to plead my case, And if they were going to tell me no, and at least they would have said no to my face, and they would have given me a proper explanation why, and maybe could have given me a good explanation why. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. But they just completely, null and voided that, and said that they weren't going to be taking any meetings regarding that issue at this time. Come on.
So it's interesting. Sorry, I was going to say. So what was told to you that basically we're just not going to meet with you, essentially?
We're exactly what I just said. We are not. I think it was. We're not accepting. We're not accepting or scheduling any meetings regarding this issue at this time. Thank you.
Oh wow.
Wow. I mean, and if like you mentioned, if you did get a chance to meet with them, maybe that would have cleared up a few issues of contention there.
Yeah, communication even, right? We all believe that communication is essential. I know that I do. I don't like to just, it's not like I went and did this, that I called all the media and wanted to do a rant, the day after this happened. This was just something that happened when Sherdog or Dave Mandel came to ATT, and he didn't even ask me about this. He was just asking me about my fight in general, and this just kind of came out. It's not like this was some preconceived plan, for me to say these things. I mean, but it was some just better communication between, an athlete. First off, all athletes, but especially an athlete like myself who's put 10 years into this company. I've bled a lot more on that canvas that makes that money than the people that shut me down from having a discussion. You know what I'm saying? That's just not how you treat people in general, right? We can agree on that. Why would somebody close the doors on proper communication?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's the thing that everybody's wondering. And the big question everybody also is wondering is this something that's been happening recently? Back when you've been in the company for a long time, when you've tried to reach out previously to speak to people, were you granted that opportunity? And is this just something that's happened more recently with the takeover? Or have you noticed that it's always been difficult to communicate with people such as the admin people in the UFC?
No, I've never really had an issue that required an immediate, what I felt was more urgent matter. I never had like anything like that needed to be addressed right away. Usually all the issues that I might have had in the past, if you'd even call them issues, would have been addressed with someone as simple as my manager, or my manager speaking to the matchmaker, or me speaking directly to a matchmaker. You see what I'm saying? Like, I've never had any, I mean, sure, I've had some issues. I'm like anybody else, you know, like I said, we all want more money. It's kind of hard to live off of, you know, show money, you know, sometimes, and that's the way that it's kind of designed. You know, there's a lot of fighters that got to be fighting. So it's like any issues I might have had in the past, you can kind of say they might have been directly influenced by maybe the circumstances that I was placed in, but based off of maybe like a loss, or, you know, a long time without fighting, and just like the need to make more money. So I'm saying it's not like a specific issue that really came about that I can say, or that I can recall, you know. But this was just one of those things. You know, I know that you asked me earlier, I didn't really answer the question, like, how do I stay, you know, mentally in it now? I'm not, man. I'm not in it. I'm just going in. I'm hitting that training session, getting ready for this fight.
It's a crazy situation. Is there sort of any concern on your part? Obviously, this is something that you sound like this is something you have to do. You're already too far in. But is there any concern that, you know, having this sort of mindset will be in any way a detriment or a factor in this upcoming fight?
When you don't care, then that's not a concern, you know? So no, I mean, I honestly know firsthand that your mental approach in training camps ultimately means nothing. I can be amped for a training camp, get no injuries going into a training camp, have a perfect camp, no personal issue, nothing. And then I can still lose that fight. You see what I'm saying? And then I can I've had fights where, you know, you got family members dying. You've got, like real life turmoil going on in your life financially. You've got injuries that kept you couldn't even train. And then you go into a fight and you get an impressive win and a performance of the night bonus. I know firsthand that none of this matters. Your experience doesn't matter. Your, you know, training camp don't matter. Your injuries don't matter. Ultimately, the only thing that matters is what you're going to be doing in that cage, you know?
And when you say you don't care, can you just explain that, just so it's not taken the wrong way? What do you mean by you don't care? As in you don't care?
I don't care what happens to me in this fight. I don't care what happens to, as far as my, you know, being retained as a independent contractor, not an employee under the Zuffa umbrella. I mean, like, the way that they treated me shows that they obviously don't want me fighting for them. That's the way I take that they don't really, that's the way I absorb that, is that they don't really think enough of me, and they really don't want me fighting for them anyways, almost treating me like I'm a piece of malfunctioned or you know, old equipment that isn't any good anymore. And I don't think that I'm projecting that. I think that that's just plainly written right there. That's how I perceive that to be. And why would you want to work for somebody that doesn't want you to work for them? You know?
Is the sort of painful thing about it the fact that you have always almost been with them for 10 years, and as like you mentioned, you've bled a lot of blood, and you've been a fan favorite for such a long time?
Yeah, I'm one of those guys that's always been, you know, die hard. It's like always been appreciative of the opportunities that I've been given. Not that I didn't earn those opportunities. You know, I don't want fighters to be getting twisted, you know, there either. I want people to understand that I earned those opportunities, but I'm still appreciative that they were given to me. And then, yeah, that kind of hurts right there. You know, it's almost like a bad breakup or something like that. Because I thought things were all good. You know, like, it's like you see that in like movies where like one party thinks that the relationship's all good, and then the other party comes in and just like out of the blue just breaks up, and then they're crushed, right? Well, that's kind of how I feel. You know, I thought that we were all good. I thought that, you know, I know that Dana White personally has always, you know, said that, you know, he's respected me, and you know, I've kind of felt the same way about him, and also, but, you know, just because somebody personally might respect you, that might not be the reciprocated as a company outlook, if that makes any sense. So I still don't even know that he knows about what happened. And that's another important thing to know is like, it's a major company, you know, like there's so many like ladders and you got to climb and hoops you got to jump through. And I don't think that it should be set up like that either, you know?
Yeah, I mean, especially with that analogy about the breakup, we definitely feel you there, Cole. I think that's a sort of, vivid picture. I'm wondering, is there any kind of light at the end of the tunnel? Because I think, obviously fans don't want to see you go anywhere. Fans want to see you keep fighting, and you say you don't really care whether you're retained as a fighter. What is it that can happen to sort of make this situation right? Is it as simple as improving the communication and then obviously in the future working towards these benefits that, associations are working on? Or is it a case where you feel like maybe you'd be happy fighting somewhere else? What is sort of the answer here?
Honestly, like, I don't want to be fighting anywhere. I mean, I don't. It's this. I wish, or I don't wish, but like a lot of people might expect, rather, that like I would be like, oh well, yeah, well, I just want to go to this organization now, and that's not the case. Like you said, I was blindsided by this. Like I thought that we were all good, that I was respected. That the organization as a whole appreciated some of the things that I've done as, maybe taking some fights that I didn't want to take, but I stepped up on short notice, or, always putting on a good show, whether I win or I lose, I give it all, period. You know what I'm saying? So I kind of thought that was the overall broad view of the relationship, but to find out that it wasn't, and to get blindsided like that, I mean, that just, like 8 weeks ago, I was ready to take on the division, and now I don't even want to fight. That's how hard that hit. Wow. I don't want to train. I don't even want to, because like right now that just puts in a sour taste for me, for mixed martial arts as a whole, and like the organization in general. It's like, man, if somebody like me, who's put 20 fights in, who put 10 years in, and this is how they're getting treated and not compensated, man, like why would anyone want to go through that? Like, what if you went to work and you put in a year's worth of work, and they were just like, we're going to pay you 1/4 because we don't really have a good reason, but we'll give you an opportunity to work all next year too. How would you react? Wouldn't you want to just like not even do that career field, probably, right? Especially if you'd been working for that company for a long time. Yeah, I mean,
this is a crazy situation. We appreciate your candidness, Cole. I'm just wondering, the way you're talking about how you don't really want to fight anymore, this fight against Mizuto Hirota, could this potentially be your last fight?
Potentially, yeah.
Cole, I mean, I know he doesn't listen to the show every week, but this may come across him at some point. If you do have a message for Dana White, I mean, you haven't been granted a chance to speak to him. What would your message to him be if he does end up listening to this part of the show? What would you convey to him?
I'm trying to reach out to him. Reach out to me, brother. I'd love to sit down and talk. Comb through this stuff.
All right, well, there you guys go. A lot of stuff is happening right now in the crazy world of MMA. Make sure to check out Cole Miller on Twitter at Cole Miller ATT, and check out his fight at UFC Sacramento, which is, of course, going to feature the final fight of the California kid, Uriah Faber. Cole, it's been such a pleasure having you on the program for the first time. It's a tough time. It's disappointing that we had to do it this way for the first time, but we're going to keep an eye on your story, and whenever you'd like to, man, you're always welcome back on the program. Best of luck with everything, and we'll keep on the story over the next few weeks.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, guys.
Hey, guys, this is Brian Stan. You're listening to Submission Radio.
All right, guys, our next guest is one of the most respected analysts in MMA. Other than his great work on MMA fighting, he is the host of the Luke Thomas Show on SiriusXM Rush 93 at a fantastic Monday to Friday. He also hosts two phenomenal podcasts, Monday Morning Analyst and his live chat, Promotional Malpractice. He returns back to Submission Radio. Luke Thomas, it's been a while. Welcome back. How's it going?
Thanks for having me, guys. Really appreciate it.
Now, so let's start with the older stuff first. Conor McGregor was stripped of his UFC featherweight belt so that Pedersen Holloway could be in an interim title fight, UFC 206. First off, were you one of the people who wanted to see McGregor relinquish the belt in order for it to be defended more often? And also, what did you think about the way the situation was handled?
Yeah, I did want to see him relinquish it or defend it. I just wanted to see it defended. How about that? Didn't matter if he was going to do it or if someone else was going to do it, but this thing had to get going. There was just too much time being spent doing nothing and languishing. I made this point on the MMA Beat earlier this week. You can see what happens when you begin to jump the queue and the title doesn't get defended. It creates havoc in these divisions. There has to be some kind of order. Now, not all the time, not every time. But you can see that, like, in the wake of what has happened, the featherweight division has been laid to waste. And some of that's inevitable. And I'm not saying that's a reason never to give a guy a chance to go do some extraordinary things, which Conor McGregor did. But at the same time, you can see why the architecture matters and why it has to be obeyed. So I definitely wanted to see it defended. But I will say the way in which they did it just seems so ham-fisted and absurd. Taking it away, making Jose the champion, and then creating another title to ostensibly save an event that is beyond saving for, a title being given that doesn't mean anything, that was existing out of thin air. It's bizarre, to say the least.
Well, there's a lot of interesting things about this situation. What do you make of the fact that McGregor is yet to respond in any way?
I'm not sure that's true. Number one, his coach has responded.
Right.
And I don't think that happens without at least some kind of coordination, or at least some kind of like-mindedness about it. And also, I can't declare to you at this moment when we're speaking that what McGregor did in getting a boxing license is a matter-of-fact response. But I don't know, guys. Living here in the real world, it doesn't seem coincidental, right? This thing happened after the other. The events feel connected to me. Now, ultimately, what it means more than that, your guess is as good as mine, certainly. But that he hasn't come out and made a verbal tirade, he doesn't have to. He's Conor McGregor. You don't see Floyd Mayweather doing stuff like that either. Sometimes his surrogates, Leonard Ellerbe, will come out and say things. Floyd may not. They always kind of take the high road. Now, Conor takes the low road at these press conferences. But, I mean, for things like this, he is thinking at a different level and acting at a different level. It's a little bit of chess versus checkers. And so that he hasn't taken to Twitter and lashed out. Maybe he decided after UFC 200, or before, I should say, that didn't get him very far. It didn't work. Maybe he's trying something different this time.
It's interesting how you mentioned the boxing license. I mean, we don't really know what exactly it means. Everybody always talks about this McGregor-Mayweather fight, but it always just seems like a bit of a unicorn. It doesn't look like it's going to happen. But do you see a scenario where Conor McGregor could potentially pursue boxing in any way? And do you think he could do it on his own, or would it be possibly with the UFC being a co-promoter? Does any of that sort of work in your mind?
All of it still feels pretty remote and very unlikely, but I don't think it's crazy. There's just a few hurdles. I mean, basically how it works is every fighter, including McGregor, who signs a contract with the UFC, stipulates that the UFC is their sole promoter. That's true for professional wrestling, that's true for boxing, that's true for martial arts, that's true for mixed martial arts, obviously, in particular. And that unless it's stipulated in the agreement or the UFC says otherwise, they can't do it. So the UFC would have to say that they could, and I don't see why they would. It's not in their interest to do so. So then he would essentially have to find another way around it. The other way around it is to become a boxer, to get a boxing license. Why? Because here there is a federal regulation called the Muhammad Ali Act, or the Muhammad Ali Boxing Reform Act. I'm not sure of the full name of it, but in short, it would not allow the UFC. It would essentially stipulate that the promoter couldn't tie him down, and so he would then be free to box. But to me, a court would have to decide what supersedes what. Yes, there is this federal law, but he had this. He has no boxing professional experience, and he had this contract where he agreed to let the UFC be his sole promoter. So now the question is, does he want to go to court? You can see how there's all these various obstacles still in the way. So are we in a position to doubt Conor McGregor and say he can't do it? I'm not going to be that guy, but I'm also going to look around and say there are definitely some real challenges.
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting situation that could get more interesting quick. We'll circle back to Conor McGregor later, but let's skip ahead to the biggest news of this week. I mean, Bjorn Rebney's return has brought fighters such as GSP, Tim Kennedy, Cain Velasquez, TJ Dillashaw, and Donald Cerrone with him to form the MMA Athletes Association. What was your reaction to, yet another MMA association being formed, and specifically, what did you make of this one? I mean, there was a lot to digest, a 2-hour conference call. What were your big takeaways?
Yeah, here's the crazy part. After a 2-hour conference call, I still had a bunch of questions, and some of those won't even be able to be answered until time passes. You know, what exactly is it you plan to do, and how do you go about doing it, and then we sort of measure their performance as such. So we just have to kind of see what they do, because a lot of it we just don't know. But I guess to answer the question, this definitely felt different to me. This felt different than the MMAAA, which has been around a very long time. This felt different to me than the PFA, which I thought had a good plan. But, you know, it's interesting. I spoke to Tim Kennedy today, and you mentioned the return of Bjorn Rebney. I am apprehensive about it. But I asked Tim Kennedy, and I was like, you know, you brought in a fox to guard the hen house. Like, why is this promoter there? And, you know, why wouldn't you join an organization like the PFA with Jeff Boris, a famous American baseball agent? And he actually made a really interesting point. It was that how many guys have promoted MMA on national television? And I'm talking about North America, but you know, there's like what, 3 or 4? Dana White, Scott Coker, Bjorn Rebney, maybe Reed Harris from WEC days. Maybe if you want to count the IFL guys, you can count them on your hand, the number of guys who have done it. And he said he needed Bjorn Rebney's expertise. He called him almost necessarily evil. I mean, sorry, not necessarily evil, but he didn't call him a necessary evil. He said he's almost a necessary evil, in that maybe you don't like the guy, maybe you're apprehensive about him, but this is a guy who knows what a promoter is thinking, all the various issues that relate to ticket sales and broadcast rights and everything else. He just had a set of expertise that they needed to do this job effectively. And he said he would rather have that, basically, than a guy like Jeff Boris, who has a background in organized labor but knows nothing about MMA. It was very interesting. They'd rather have a guy of dubious ethical quality but has the core competencies and knows MMA, rather than someone who knows organized labor but knows nothing about MMA. That, to me, was very interesting.
Well, when asked about what kind of power the association would have over WME, IMG, and the UFC, Bjorn mentioned a labor strike. Now, Tim was also on our program previously, and he told us that, you know, labor strike is just something that could happen in the worst case scenario. But how realistic do you think that scenario is? And could you ever see a situation where the fighters actually go on strike?
Yeah, I don't know if they're going to do a strike or they just choose not to compete. Right? I was trying to get that clarified. I'm hearing that, okay, because this gets complicated. If they're not a union, if they're just a trade association and there is a legal difference, if you strike, you face criminal penalty. So you can't do that. Now they may decide to turn an organization into a union, in which case, okay, fine. But point being is, what I'm hearing that they may do is not declare we're on strike. They just won't take fights. Now, the question to me is, how sustainable is that? Now, Georges St-Pierre can afford to do that. Maybe TJ Dillashaw can, I don't know. Maybe Cain Velasquez. Maybe all the guys you saw up there can afford to do that. But some of these fighters, you know, we had Cole Miller this past week. You know, I don't know if he's living hand to mouth, but he's not in a position to just not take fights. So we're going to have, again, you asked before, like, what were some of your takeaways? Okay, you guys are going to not fight or go on strike. I want to see how you pull that one off.
Yeah, this is an interesting situation. It's funny you mentioned that because Cole was on our show just before, so we spoke to him as well. Now, Bloody Elbows John S. Nash made a really great point, which is, why would investors step up to fund a fight association when there's not supposed to be a return on a fight association? What do you think about that? And is that something that seems a bit strange to you?
Yeah, I had the exact same question, and I was wondering, you know, there's a lot of negative talk about Rebney, and I'm not saying that those criticisms are misplaced. I think a fair bit of skepticism is warranted in this particular circumstance. But to me, the very structure of it is a little bit puzzling as well. Now, on the one hand, that's what Rebney does, right? You know it's going to be in for the long haul. You have to find some kind of source of funding to keep this going. And if you think about Bellator, at least when he was running it and getting it off the ground, that is what he did successfully. He did manage to cobble together investors. He did manage to create a sustainable product. He did manage to staff an organization, and he did manage to find a way to eventually reach the next stage of that for-profit enterprise, selling it to Viacom. So it makes sense that he would be the guy who would be able to do those services, bring that to bear. But is that the right model for a fighter advocacy group? I have my doubts as well. I mean, these investors, I mean, unless this is charity, and I don't know too many investors who think of their investing as charity, they're going to expect some kind of return. I have some big questions about that as well.
Well, circling back to Conor McGregor, with all these demands from him getting equal share and equity and paid for what he's worth, and now being stripped of the featherweight title and going out and getting a boxing license, do you think that it's more than likely than ever that we would see him join the MMA Athletes Association, especially considering how much of an asset he is to the UFC and how much value he would add to the association?
Conor McGregor joining association? Yeah, I don't buy that so much. I mean, I can't, again, I mean, who knows what this guy's going to do, but I you know, it's funny, like a lot of MMA fans hate the Mayweather comparisons, but I really like them. Not because I think they'll ever fight. I mean, again, I don't think that's likely, but Conor is following that model where, I mentioned this before, even small stuff. Like, Conor is the only fighter outside of Mayweather who thanks the media after events, right? This sort of like, I'm the king here. Let me perform the kingly role of thanking the various court jesters here before me. There's a little bit of that, you know. But the other part about this is, remember what Mayweather did. Now, Mayweather was in boxing at a time where boxing was basically fully formed. The Ali Act passed in the 90s. I think it got reformed again around 2000 or so. But the framework was basically set. There wasn't this clamoring to form a union opposite of one organization. So he just sort of took matters into his own hands. He bought out his contract from Top Rank for $750,000 and then just went on that way. And I think Conor's going to do something different. It's something along that path. The difference, though, is that while Conor's going to march to the beat of his own drum, he is doing it in a climate aforementioned. He is doing it in a climate where there is this push for organized labor, where there are these different, MMAAA and MMAFA and everyone else. And in other words, as a consequence, he is challenging the institutional power of the UFC. That potentially could have a trickle-down effect for everyone. If Conor McGregor, for example, decides to really put the pedal to the metal and can get a court to say that if you are signed to the UFC, but yes, you get a boxing license, and now you choose to go box, UFC can't stop you. Wow, think about what that might mean. Think about how you might begin to challenge now the structural integrity of that contract that they all signed. You begin to poke holes in it. So, you know, he is following the Mayweather path, but he's following the Mayweather path at a time when MMA is structurally different and the fighters are beginning to push back against institutional authority.
Just before we let you go, Luke, I mean, how different could the MMA landscape look if all these things start to happen and sort of come together? I mean, you've got this association, and then you've got Conor McGregor. At this point, it's just hypothetical, but, you know, maybe he does go and challenge, you know, the UFC's contract structure and the legality of it as well. And then, you know, you got the association demanding more and more. How different could the MMA landscape look, say, a year from now, or 2 years or 3 years?
1 year, I don't think it looks so different. 2 years, maybe different. 3 years, maybe very different. I think in 3 years, we will have had substantial changes. You guys know 3 years in MMA is almost an eternity. Careers can begin and end in the course of 3 years, you know. So that's what I think is a more reasonable timeline. I mean, they still got to get out and convince people to do this. They got to show that, you know, for those who might be interested in the union, that this is a viable path. And here's the other part to consider. You know, Conor McGregor's out there getting boxing licenses, and we'll see what happens. We haven't seen the UFC's response yet. And I suspect eventually, and I don't know when it's going to be, I don't know what's going to trigger it. Maybe they're just trying to wait for this whole thing to blow over. If they think that's what's going to happen, I don't know. But eventually the UFC is going to respond to this. They are not going to lay down. They are going to fight tooth and nail to preserve everything that they already have. And we should be prepared for that. So, you know, what could things look like? I think that some kind of union will be formed by then. Maybe it'll be the MMAAA, and I do think that there'll be some kind of collective bargain agreement within 3 to 5 years, is what I will say. However much Conor McGregor affects that role remains to be seen.
Wow, exciting times for our sport, the sport that we all love. There he is, guys, Luke Thomas. Don't forget to follow him on Twitter at SBN Luke Thomas. And, of course, check out his fantastic shows, the Monday Morning Analyst, Promotional Malpractice, that's his live chat, and the Luke Thomas Show, which he hosts on Sirius XM Rush 93, Monday to Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Luke, thank you so much for jumping on the program. We always appreciate it. Thanks so much for giving a couple of court jesters like us your time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it.
Hi, guys. It's Joanna Jędrzejczyk, UFC strawweight champion. Listen to Submission Radio.
All right, guys. Wow, what an episode so far it's been, but we're not done yet. It's time to break down the Ultimate Fighter 24 finale with a good friend of the show. He's almost on every week, and that's because we love him so much. Very, very lucky to have Damon Martin back on Submission Radio. Damon, thank you for coming back on the program, man.
Oh, thanks for always having me. I appreciate it.
You're like one of those French girls. We can't say no to drawing you, and having you on the program is the cherry on top. So thanks for joining us. Now, what we're going to do is we'll talk about this TUF finale, and afterwards, for all listeners, stick around because we're also going to give our thoughts on the new Fighters Association. Obviously, it's a bit of a topic on the episode this week, so why not weigh in and give our thoughts on that? But let's kick off talking about this card by talking about this Ryan Hall Gray Maynard fight. A lot of people excited to see Hall back in the octagon. It's been a while in between fights. Cass, when you saw that this fight was going down, did you think the Gray had a chance of winning here, considering the fact that he did win his last fight at featherweight?
Yeah, I mean, I thought this is a somewhat favorable matchup for him. Gray Maynard, you know, the biggest issue he's had is just more physically. You know, he doesn't have the greatest chin. It really has declined. He's had a lot of knockouts recently, TJ Grant, Nate Diaz, and Ross Pearson. So going in against a guy like Ryan Hall, who was primarily a BJJ guy, and you knew that, you know, this isn't a K1 guy. He's not going to be standing there with massive knockout power. I thought if there was going to be any fight that he was going to win, this is a pretty good matchup. Unfortunately, the fight wasn't great. I will say, though, before we get to you, Damon, there was a part of me that kind of, I don't know if I want to say enjoyed watching Ryan Hall fight, but I am intrigued by the way this guy is so one-dimensional, yet he came in here with, you know, a bunch of kicks. He's obviously looking to improve and add things to his arsenal. And, you know, he didn't just beat Gray Maynard on the ground, but he beat him on the feet, which actually surprised me.
Yeah, Damon, I'm wondering because I guess the big criticism is it wasn't a great game plan from Gray. He just looked sort of frustrated during the fight. And a lot of people thought, even though Hall is a killer jiu-jitsu guy, when he's on the ground, do you believe that he should have sort of trusted in his skills a little bit? And like Brian Stan said, sort of went in there and tried to throw a few shots or try to capitalize a little bit and see how he goes, if he goes down sort of in that guard position with Hall.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you're playing with fire, you know, messing around in the guard game of a guy like Ryan Hall, especially as strong as his leg locks are, heel hooks, things like that. But, you know, the problem that Gray Maynard had is, you know, for all the times that Ryan Hall kind of flopped down and tried to go for the submission, he never really did anything on the feet to do otherwise. I mean, basically Ryan was, you know, kicking at him, and then as soon as they got close, he would drop to the ground and try to get a submission, and Gray would pull out. Or get out of whatever he was trying, but then he wouldn't do anything else. So, you know, if something's not working, you kind of have to go to a different game plan. And, you know, if that means jumping down and maybe trying to land some punches on Ryan Hall and then jumping back up again, great. I think that literally could have been the difference between a win and a loss for Gray Maynard here. I think if he would have even just gone to the ground briefly, landed a couple hammer fists, and then jumped back up again, he probably could have won that fight. But ultimately, you know, it was an odd fight. But, you know, again, Ryan Hall was the only one really engaging offensively, and Gray Maynard just didn't do anything to counter that.
Yeah, and a lot of people online may have not enjoyed the fight. I really enjoyed the fight. I'm with you, Casper. I'm really enjoying seeing Hall do his thing. And much to your point, Damon, I'm wondering if his next opponent will sort of take a chance on their own skill set. And when Ryan pops down, really sort of test if they can pop down there and hit him a couple of times. Because strategy-wise, I mean, he is looking like an interesting puzzle for his next opponent. So excited to see him fight again. And hopefully he can fight again a little bit sooner because there was a bit of a break in between his fights. But let's jump to the main card. Sara McMann versus Alexis Davis. Now, Davis was out. She had a child. She was coming back in. And Sara McMann, I mean, a lot was made about the fact that she was going to display her knockout power in this fight. Casper, interesting moment after the first round when she went back into the corner and said she couldn't feel half of her face and it was numb, that she wanted to take Alexis back down. What did you make of that moment, and what sort of went through your mind when you saw her talking to her corner and sort of portraying that? Because that was an interesting point of the fight.
I wasn't sure where they were going to sort of go with that, whether they were going to really, take note of it. It didn't really seem like they did. They didn't make a big deal out of it. I believe it was Brian Stan who mentioned that it might have been a broken orbital bone. I was looking for that, and I didn't really see her face swelling up, so I'm not sure what it might have been, but I was really puzzled at the fact that she did try and take her down to the ground. I mean, afterwards she explained it, saying that, when she got hurt, it was actually on the feet, not when they were on the ground, where Alexis Davis was actually handily winning and throwing a bunch of elbows from the bottom, looking really good. The one thing about Sara McMann, she's obviously an Olympic caliber athlete, very, very physically good. She has a lot of knockout power, and I would love to see a fight where she really does stay on the feet and maybe rack up some knockouts. She came very close against Miesha Tate. The one sort of, I guess, downside to her and her game planning is just fight IQ. A lot of times she sort of takes the fight to places where, she's not necessarily winning. Again, the Miesha Tate fight, she was winning on the feet. She consistently went down to the ground and she lost that fight. She's had a bit of sort of lackluster fights in here. Again, I thought she was going in for a similar performance. I mean, she got beat up on the ground even though she was on top, and then she decided, hey, I'm going to take her down to the ground again. I thought it was going to be a repeat of round one, and the fact that she actually got that arm triangle against someone who is as skilled as Alexis Davis on the ground, I was actually pretty shocked. But the way she sort of overcame adversity, she, like you mentioned, she couldn't feel half her face, and that arm triangle before she got it, it really didn't look like she was going to get it until she actually got it. It looked like she couldn't go from half guard into side control, and for her to be able to do that, I mean, it was a good win. And I like how she got on the mic afterwards, whether she's, obviously not going to get Amanda Nunes or Ronda Rousey, but I love how afterwards she got on the mic and she sort of made a call out. I like that as well.
Yeah, that was good, man. 36 years old, it really seems like things are coming along for her. A lot of people sort of high on her, Damon, but if you're a UFC matchmaker, obviously you're not going to give her the championship fight next. There's a few people in front of her, but who do you give her? Is there a name in the division that sort of stands out to you as a good next fight for Sara McMann?
I think you've got kind of a 4-woman tournament right now, and then you basically kind of see who wins out of these next couple of fights. I think I would personally like to see Sara McMann against Juliana Pena. I think, where Juliana has been so dominant with her ground game and her wrestling, I think if she could do that against Sara McMann, that's a huge statement. But at the same time, I don't know that she could do that against Sara McMann because we're talking about an Olympic silver medalist. So I think Juliana would have to change up her game a little bit, and we would have to see, what she's got in her arsenal outside of her wrestling and her takedowns. And then, hopefully we get to see, maybe Raquel Pennington against Valentina Shevchenko. And, maybe the winners of those two fights, depending on how things play out, whoever looks the most impressive, or, potentially, they fight each other depending on what happens with Nunes and Rousey. That plays out, obviously. So I think that would be kind of the way I'd like to see things go. I'd be okay with McMann against, Pennington, or McMann against Shevchenko as well. I think any of those three combinations would be fine. But I personally would like to see McMann against Pena, just because I think that would test Pena. And if Pena can get past McMann, who is a dominant wrestler, obviously the best wrestler in the division, then I think at that point you can't deny Juliana Pena getting the title shot. I know she's already made a lot of complaints about that. And listen, I don't think there's an argument that you couldn't give it to Juliana right now. But, we got the title fight coming up in just a few weeks at UFC 207. Can't imagine the winner of that's going to want to fight again before, let's say, maybe April, or if it's Rousey, who knows? So, again, I think why not stay busy? Why not stay active and go out there and get another fight? I know Juliana's not going to be happy with that, but again, I think sitting out is a mistake.
And just on Alexis Davis, I mean, I know she took some time out of the octagon and lost this fight, but I was impressed with some of the stuff that she did, just like you said, Casper. So, I don't know. I'm interested to see what happens with her next. There was some time away from the octagon. She had a child. Her last fight was against Ronda Rousey, which she lost pretty quickly. But I'm excited to see what the next fight looks like. She definitely looks like she's got potential to get a few wins in the UFC and maybe go back to those winning ways. Let's jump to this welterweight showdown between Jorge Masvidal and Jake Ellenberger. I mean, oh my Lord, what a situation this was. On an exciting card and in a fight where Jorge Masvidal was putting it on Jake Ellenberger and landing quite a lot of good shots, quite a lot of good combinations. Jake ended up getting his toe stuck in the octagon and between the walls. And then Herb Dean sort of took a timeout, had to pop out of the octagon to figure out exactly what to do there. And alas, it ended up being called officially a TKO win for Jorge Masvidal. Damon, I mean, there's been previous fights where fighters have gotten their foot stuck in between the cage and the octagon. I saw Rich Franklin had one outside the UFC. What did you think about the way Herb Dean handled the situation, ultimately the call that he officially put down on it?
Well, I think pausing the fight because his feet were stuck in the cage was the right thing to do. You don't want the guy to be literally locked in the cage and he's just taking punches because he can't defend himself because his foot is held onto the cage. It's like a old pro wrestling thing where they used to handcuff their opponents to the ropes and you couldn't get out of it and they beat him up. I mean, that's what it felt like. He's stuck in the cage. You can't let him have that happen. But I don't know why the fight had to be stopped. Now, I'm not a rules expert, so maybe because Herb stopped the fight in that moment that it had to be stopped, which I don't think Herb Dean should be faulted for that. I mean, listen, the guy is taking undue punishment because his foot is locked inside the cage. He can't get it out. It's trapped. I mean, think about how painful that would be if you're trying to get out. Just, your foot is caught between a fence and the bottom of the cage. So yeah, it's going to hurt really painful. So I don't think Herb made the wrong call stopping it, but if that's the rule that you can't stop it and pause the fight or something like that, you have to, stop the fight, it's over. That's just an unfortunate, part of the rule book. And I hope they change that. Although obviously it's a pretty rare occasion. We'd hope that not, very many fighters are going to get their foot stuck in the cage. It's just unfortunate. Listen, Jorge Masvidal was having a phenomenal performance. He was winning. Maybe he would have won that fight in the next, minute after that. Who knows? It kind of reminds me of that Tyron Woodley, Carlos Condit fight where, Tyron was dominating. Tyron was winning that fight, but at the end of the day, you win because you get the takedown. His knee blows out. Again, it's a little, obviously not quite as controversial as this one, but it takes away a little bit of the performance, even though Tyron was winning that fight. People would say, oh, well, Carlos got injured. Same thing here. Masvidal was winning the fight. He had a great, nearly finished the fight in the first round. But then the way it ended, again, it's just kind of disappointing. And you just hate to have that little asterisk put next to the fight.
Yeah, it was an awkward post-fight speech there where the crowd was completely silent. And what do you do if you're Masvidal? I mean, you just make the most of the situation. Now, no doubt about it, Ellenberger will probably appeal the decision to try and change it to something else. But, Casper, do you think it should be put down as a TKO or something else officially on the record?
Just quickly, one of the funniest things, the Wikipedia Bandits got to that page, and it was there as a TKO in brackets toe hold. How about that? So technically it should be a TKO awarded to the cage, but no, in all seriousness, I don't think Masvidal should have been awarded the TKO. Nothing against him, I just don't think that's the way the fight should have been called. If you look at Jake Ellenberger, he was chasing Masvidal, he was going for something. Originally, I think a takedown, he was trying to chase his leg, then he sort of went for almost like a knee / a kick, and then, Masvidal kind of blocked it, so Ellenberger fell on his ass. It's not like Masvidal dropped him. Ellenberger was completely conscious and, with it when he was on the ground. It just so happened that his toe was caught in the fence. And, I mean, he didn't really have a choice. He couldn't defend himself. He had to go for his toe. And let's say best case scenario, right? Masvidal is raining down punches on him. Best case scenario, Ellenberger goes, okay, I will defend myself. How long can he keep that up for? Eventually, he's going to be stuck, and he's going to be like, well, I can defend myself for the rest of eternity, but my toe is still going to be stuck. So he didn't really have a choice. I mean, what he did going for his toe, it was basically inevitable. It was something that he was going to have to do anyway. So, yeah, I just don't, looking at it, it's not like Masvidal knocked him out. Yes, he rained down punches on him, but Ellenberger didn't really have any choice. So I don't think it should be TKO. I think, if anything, it should be a no contest, and Ellenberger should try and get this one overturned. I know that Nevada, they oftentimes, in general, a lot of sanctioning commissions, they don't overturn their decisions because they don't really want to make themselves look bad. But if I'm Ellenberger, I'm definitely trying to get this one overturned. I think it's kind of the situational equivalent of a shit sandwich. And even though Ellenberger wasn't doing great and Masvidal was looking good in that fight, I don't think Ellenberger should have a TKO on his record.
And just quickly on the fight, Damon, do you want to see a rematch, or would you like both fighters to move on to something else?
I agree with what Casper's saying in terms of the result. I wouldn't mind seeing it, either being overturned or, something like that. But ultimately, I don't know that I necessarily need to see it again. It wasn't, an epic grudge match. It wasn't, a 3-round war, and we just didn't get a decision that we liked. I think they could both move on. And listen, we could revisit it down the road. I mean, they're both veterans. Their records were eerily the same, if you noticed that tonight. So, at some point down the road, I'd be okay with it. But I don't think we necessarily need to see it next.
All right. Well, what's next is the Joseph Benavidez Henry Cejudo fight. Both guys coaching in the Ultimate Fighter. An interesting matchup, and maybe one of the last interesting matchups for both guys in the flyweight division. Interesting moment in the first round where a point was deducted for the groin strikes. Henry Cejudo hit Benavidez in the groin a couple of times, and a point was deducted. Casper, did you agree with his decision? Brian Stan wasn't too happy about it because there was a lot of action going on. What did you think?
Yeah, I'm all for it. I mean, I don't think that Cejudo in any way was trying to do it on purpose, but we've spoken about this as far as groin shots, as far as eye pokes. I mean, these are things that can affect the fight, and at the end of the day, it's an illegal move, regardless of what the intent was. So, you know, if he hit him, you know, and for example, Benavidez was altered in the fight, a lot of the times that kind of stuff gets swept under the radar and nobody ever mentions it. These guys are warriors. These guys are fighters. It's not really in their nature to show weakness. So I'm all for it. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're throwing inside leg kicks and they're hitting someone in the balls, if you can't do it properly, then I think in some ways that should be not necessarily taken away from you, but you need something that's going to make you think twice before you throw it, because at the end of the day, that can affect a fight. So I'm all for it. Same thing as eye pokes. I think those are the kinds of things that, you know, should be much more heavily penalized, and where, you know, if that's the kind of thing that does affect fights from here on out, not to say that this is sort of drawing a line in the sand from here on out, but if that is something that affects fights in the future, and it creates more controversy, I think the benefits would be at least that fighters would be a lot more careful. I would much rather, you know, fighters get points taken away than fights being altered and sort of questioned because, well, you know, this guy won, but technically he got hit with a low blow or an eye poke. There's been too many of those fights, so I'm all for the 1 point being taken away.
Well, Damon, the point was very instrumental in the final decision. A lot of people felt like Henry Cejudo won this fight. I was very impressed with Cejudo. People either felt like it was a draw or Cejudo may have won a decision, a split decision or a decision. What did you think of the fact that Joseph Benavidez pulled this one out and one judge gave it to him 30-26?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it was a close fight. I had it 29-27 for, 29-27 for Joseph Benavidez. I could have seen, obviously it would have been 29-28 without the point deduction. It was a close fight though. And listen, I wouldn't, Henry Cejudo battled, man. He was out there. I mean, that's, to me, was the best he's ever looked, even if he did get beat in that fight. So I didn't think he won, but I thought again, that's one of those razor close decisions where a split decision doesn't surprise me. It wouldn't have shocked me if it would have gone, 29-27 the other way or 29-20, however it ends up scoring with that point deduction. I wouldn't have been shocked to give 2 rounds or even potentially a draw, I guess, to Henry Cejudo, because that's probably how it would have played out, because Henry won round 1 for sure. And then potentially if he won round 2, then it's a draw. It's 28-28. But, yeah, it was a close fight. I don't think Henry Cejudo has anything to be ashamed of, though. I mean, that was such a great performance. And listen, the crazy thing about Henry Cejudo that I think a lot of people forget is he's still very young in his career. I mean, he was an Olympic gold medalist in 2008. This is what I may be making this number up. Was he got like 8 to 10 fights at this point in his career? 8 to 10 fights in his career. I mean, he's still very young in his career. He's now taken on the 2 best fighters in the world in this weight class, and he gave one of them an epic battle. Give the guy another year and a half of these kind of top-notch fights, and let's see if he can't work himself back into title contention.
You weren't far off. 12 fights. He's had 12 pro fights. And, he's versed a lot of tough guys. And losing to the number 1 contender, the guy that's probably going to and rightfully going to get the next title shot, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think when you have a fight that good, and even though you lose, people look at you and say, wow, even though he lost, he improved a lot. I think you get a big rub. And, much like you, Damon, I agree, man. I definitely give this fight to Benavidez. I'm also curious, Damon, what you think about that point deduction, but I'm definitely going to say Joseph Benavidez won. I think that first round clearly went to Cejudo. I mean, he did the more damage. He knocked Benavidez down. And the second round and the third round, I just saw Cejudo, he looked good. He didn't look bad. He threw a lot of strikes, but just so many of them missed. And I think Benavidez, he didn't exactly go in there and smash him with haymakers either, but he was pretty good at getting in and out. Maybe, I don't know if he's got as much power as he used to, but he was pretty good at sort of sticking and moving, and it seemed like his game plan worked out well. What did you think, though, about that point deduction, Damon? Just curious.
I thought it was valid. I mean, listen, we complain at the referees constantly for not taking away points, for fence grabbing, for eye gouging, for, low blows. And listen, those were 2 low blows in the span of about 90 seconds. we could have, if it would have happened in separate rounds, we could say, okay, once in a round, once later in the next round, maybe you don't do that. But they happen within 90 seconds of each other. And I understand they're accidental, but you threw a kick. It was it didn't, it wasn't aimed correctly. He moved, whatever the case may be, and you hit him in the balls. I mean, again, we admonish referees constantly for not taking away points for these kind of things, because the only way you can truly prevent a fighter from doing something, we hope, is by taking points away. Just like fence grabs, just like eye pokes. I mean, listen, I think if you get an eye poke and it's bad enough, you should take a point away immediately. We shouldn't have to talk about 2 or 3 eye pokes, a guy bleeding out of his eye or something crazy before you finally take a point away. So, yeah, it sucks. I mean, I feel for Henry Cejudo. I really don't think he meant to do it, but he threw a kick. It was in the wrong spot, and it hit Joseph Benavidez low, just like an eye poke. I don't think a lot of eye pokes are on purpose. I don't think guys are, necessarily trying to gouge their opponent's eyes. But when you put your fingers out and you're in a fight and you're purposely putting your fingers out and that guy walks into it and you put it in his eye, it could be a fight-altering situation and you probably should lose a point. So, listen, that's the nature of the beast. Don't do it and you won't get fined. You won't lose that point.
And I agree with you guys as well. I think it's one of those things. Other fighters are going to see it. And during training, I think it's important to practice keeping your fingers in, practice your kicks landing right. And, yeah, the cage grabbing, I mean, that's something I really want to see more points getting deducted for, because I see so many fights get altered by this cage grab. So that was a job well done. And, I actually think this might be the best thing for Cejudo. He doesn't get an immediate title rematch, which I think is great. He can fight a couple of other guys in the division, which would be really good for him and for his development. And then if he does circle back around to Demetrious Johnson, well, then maybe he has a chance of beating him. I mean, I think it's still too soon for him to rematch him, and it might really kill his momentum if he gets beaten again by Demetrious Johnson. But speaking of Demetrious Johnson, I mean, a lot of people are talking about the fact of Tim Elliott having this fight against Demetrious Johnson doesn't make sense. Where Tim Elliott got cut from the UFC and wasn't very successful. And was everybody surprised when they saw Tim Elliott put up a ridiculously awesome performance against Demetrious Johnson? I mean, it had its fault. He made some mistakes. There were some issues with strategy, but it was a super exciting fight, one that really elevated Tim Elliott and also showed why Demetrious Johnson is such a superb champion, being able to come out from an area where he was losing and reevaluate everything, come back and win. Damon, first of all, were you giving Tim Elliott any kind of shot here against Demetrious Johnson?
I probably gave him a better shot than most, because I think people forget, what kind of a scrappy guy Tim Elliott was. I mean, that guy, even in the fights he lost in the UFC, he was always a game opponent. He was always out there scrapping with his opponents. He was never an easy out. And I think he's gotten a lot better, since he left the UFC. He left the UFC, went out and got 3 big wins in Titan, and then went into the Ultimate Fighter tournament and had, some battles in there. I mean, he had to fight Matt Schnell. That was a great fight. He had to go out there and beat Eric Shelton. That was a great fight. And then he had to beat Hiromasa Ogikubo, and that was a great fight. So, this guy grew a lot. I mean, we're talking about 7 wins, since he was in the UFC, 4 in the Ultimate Fighter and 3 outside of the UFC. So I thought he had I wouldn't say I gave him a shot to win, because it's Demetrious Johnson. He's one of the best fighters in the world. I didn't see this turning out to be a Matt Serra, Georges St-Pierre fight, but I definitely gave him a better shot than probably most people did, because I saw what he did on the Ultimate Fighter and I saw what he did in his UFC career before. Tim Elliott's scrappy. You're not going to just go out there and dominate this guy.
I'm interested, Casper, because some of the criticisms from Elliott's performance was the fact that he was a little bit too happy for going for that guillotine, letting Demetrious Johnson sort of take him down and scramble around on the ground with him. A lot of people a little bit critical there, saying that if he spent a bit more time defending the takedown, stopping Demetrious from getting him down, and sort of spending time on top of him in that dominant top control, the fight would have played out differently. What are your thoughts on those criticisms of Tim's performance?
Maybe, but then again, I mean, he looked pretty good in those positions. When he was going for that guillotine, I mean, we know he can sort of hit it from a lot of different positions and variations, and then he transitioned to that dast. I mean, there were moments where I thought, man, this might be over. This might be a massive upset. So I don't really fault him. I think, given that he's such a as you said, Damon's scrappy guy, and he loves the scrambles. I didn't really expect him to reinvent the wheel and completely change himself. I thought, look, if that's his style, that's what he's going to go in there and do. There were a lot of moments that he sort of did well, but yeah, I think there were a few times where he was just a little bit too happy to get into those scrambles and sort of, end up on bottom. I think the difference between him and Demetrious Johnson was that Demetrious, he sort of evolved in that fight and really changed not so much the game plan, but he fixed what went wrong in the first round. Whereas Tim Elliott, as the round started racking up for Demetrious Johnson, and I believe he won 4-1, Tim Elliott didn't really change his game plan or anything like that. So it was an amazingly fun fight, but nevertheless, a really dominant one by Demetrious Johnson. The crazy thing is, though, this was by far his toughest test since fighting Ian McCall, Uncle Creepy, in Sydney, where we got to watch him, Dennis.
Yeah, and that was a crazy fight as well. Now, Damon, a lot of people are saying this has risen Tim Elliott's stock. And not only did he have that really nice moment during the broadcast where they gave him and his dad Harley Davidsons, which I actually thought that was like a really nice touch. A nice tie-in for a sponsor. But a lot of people are really curious as to what happens to him next and who he fights next. I mean, you had Joseph Benavidez and Henry Cejudo fighting underneath. What would you like to see happen with Tim Elliott next? Do you want to see him fight a top-level competitor next, or do you want to see him fight someone from a little bit lower down the rankings?
I'd be okay with either scenario, although after tonight, seeing the performances they put on, I would love to see Tim Elliott against Henry Cejudo. I think Henry could benefit greatly from fighting a guy as tough as Tim Elliott, who is going to make him work for every takedown, who is going to get him in those scrambles, who is going to challenge him on the ground, who is going to go for those submissions. And listen, Henry's on a 2-fight losing streak. He's not going to get near the title anytime soon. But again, I think this is a fun fight. And listen, Tim Elliott, he did have some losses in the UFC. I mean, he lost to Joseph Benavidez. He lost to Zach Mikowski. These are guys that are still in the UFC. So you can't just necessarily plug him in, to the top 5 immediately because he gave Demetrious Johnson a very tough fight in one round. But I think you can match him up with some of those other top guys to see if he really does belong in that top 5. And I think he can prove that. Tim Elliott's always been a tough guy. Like I said, even the fights he lost, he was a tough out for those guys. So I think the fight with Cejudo would be a lot of fun. And just judging by tonight's performances from both of them, who wouldn't watch that?
Now, gentlemen, I want to find out everybody's thoughts on who Demetrious Johnson should be fighting next. Casper, I'm going to start off with you. A lot of people wondering what the next big fight for DJ should be. Some people saying if Cruz beats Agabra and maybe a super fight there. Other people wondering if Benavidez gets another crack at DJ once again. Where does your heart lie as to what the future holds for Demetrious Johnson?
Yeah, I like super fights and all, but I think if Demetrious Johnson, look, he was dominant, but a lot of people sort of say that Tim Elliott, he's kind of like, and I don't want to sound disrespectful, but a lot of people say in terms of his footwork and things like that, he's like a poor man's version of Dominic Cruz. So if that's the kind of performance he had against Tim Elliott, I don't really want to see him go up against Dominic Cruz, not just yet. And the other big thing is bantamweight's like stacked at the moment. That TJ Dillashaw rematch, that's on the horizon, or John Lineker. There are other guys that, obviously he's versing Cody Garbrandt, guys like Brian Caraway and Aljamain Sterling, they're all waiting in the wings. So there's a lot of exciting things going on at bantamweight, and I wouldn't really want to interrupt that. I'd rather sort of keep Demetrious Johnson on his career trajectory. I mean, he's one fight away from evening Anderson Silva's UFC title defense. I think by default, whether people love it or don't like it, maybe it's not the most exciting option because we've already seen it twice, but I think you have to do Benavidez versus Demetrious Johnson. I really don't think there are too many other options. The whole point of this whole Ultimate Fighter season was to sort of dodge this bullet and have all these rematches for Demetrious Johnson in the division. They dodged it for a bit. We had a great fight. Unfortunately, now you sort of have to go back and look at the division and say, well, who have we got? We've got Joseph Benavidez. I mean, it's been a while since they fought. He's on a good streak. He's looking good. I think you can make that fight and, maybe make it a co-main event or something. I don't really see too many other options. I'm curious what you think, though, Damon.
I think you got to do Benavidez. I mean, I don't see any other option for it. I mean, Joseph has won 6 fights in a row. It's been 3 years since they fought, 4 years since their first fight. And, I know that people remember that second fight where DJ knocked him out with one punch, but, let's not forget their first fight. It was a split decision that could have, easy. I mean, I thought that fight could have gone to Joseph. I mean, that's not, I know we paint Demetrious in this dominant light, and he absolutely has been, but I think people forget how close that first fight was. And I don't think that was Joseph's best night at the office. Yes, the rematch was one-sided and Demetrious kind of, hammered the nail into the floor, but it's been 3 years. And listen, if you continue to work your way back up and you're the guy, I don't really know how you can deny him the shot. And I think what more poetic way for Demetrious Johnson to get his 10th title defense, the one that would tie him for the record against Anderson Silva, than the guy he had to beat to win the title in the first place. I mean, that was the finals of the tournament, was him and Joseph Benavidez. And listen, Joseph has separated himself from the crowd. Are we going to make Joseph fight Kyoji Horiguchi to prove he deserves another shot against Demetrious Johnson? Guess what? If Kyoji Horiguchi somehow wins that fight, he's already lost to Demetrious too. So it's not like you're going to gain a contender there. So yeah, I think you give it to Joseph, you make it a big moment. Listen, it's his 10th title defense. You sell it like that. It's kind of a historic moment. You let Joseph go out there and fight for the title. Now, listen, if Joseph loses, then that's it. There's not going to be a fourth time, you imagine. But you never know. Like I said, look what happened in the first round with Tim Elliott tonight. You never know what happens. And maybe Joseph beats him, and then we just go on this epic, maybe we do go on an epic run where it's, Joseph and Demetrious a couple more times. I liked their first fight. The second fight was a big knockout. When I talked to Joseph before the fight, he said, he thinks this rivalry could be like, Jake LaMotta and Sugar Ray Robinson, where they fought like 6 times, and it wasn't an even series necessarily, but every fight was awesome and people loved it. And I think that's what we could get from Joseph and Demetrious. So why not? And like I said, I don't see another option. I agree. I don't necessarily want to see Demetrious go up to 135. When I talked to him a couple months ago, ahead of this fight, he told me that he woke up the morning of his training session, and he wasn't even completely in fight camp yet. He woke up at 137.5. That's 2 pounds away from the limit. That's when the guy is not, even really training hardcore for a fight. So, and we saw it. We saw him fight Dominic. We saw the huge size difference between him and Dominic. I don't really need to see it again. I don't have a problem if Demetrious never fights at 135 pounds. And like you referenced, we've got plenty of guys for Dominic Cruz to fight. If he can get past Cody Garbrandt, and that's a big if, then he's got John Lineker, he's got TJ Dillashaw, he's got other guys to fight. We don't necessarily need to see it. And I think if you're going to do a super fight, it's got to be one that's going to sell. It's got to be, Conor McGregor and Eddie Alvarez. It's got to be Anderson Silva, Georges St-Pierre. It's got to be John Jones and Cain Velasquez, or John Jones, Stipe Miocic, something like that. I don't know that we're going to get 1 million people buying a pay-per-view to see Demetrious Johnson fight Dominic Cruz.
Yeah, and you know what, guys? I want to see that fight as well. And Damon, I don't know why the UFC don't get you to do Joe Rogan duties in between fights and hype up events, because I'll tell you what, man, you can take my money right now. The way you described that, it actually sounds very, very interesting to me. So hopefully someone from the UFC is listening. We know Dana White listens to us every week and writes us positive comments in our iTunes section, 5 stars apparently. So no, I agree with you guys. I think that will be great, and I'm interested to see what happens next, how soon that fight can come together. Now, the other big thing that happened this week, and people would have seen it. It's a theme throughout the show today. We've had Tim Kennedy, we had Cole Miller, even Ryan Bader, who is sort of a free agent at the moment. The new association, the MMA Athletes Association, it made all the headlines. I think the big thing about it is just the caliber of fighters, the big names that are on top of this. Casper, I want to get your thoughts as to what you think about the association from what you've learned so far, from what you've seen, from the people that we've spoken to. And to you, how does it stand out from the Professional Fighters Association, for example? And do you think this is the one that can actually make a difference?
So a question like that, as far as what we'll see from it, it really remains to be seen. Because when the PFA came out, the Pro Fighters Association, headed by Jeff Boris, that looked really promising. And we've seen that, I don't want to say fall apart, but if you guys were sort of watching, I don't know if you guys have any listeners, about a month ago, it came out that there was a list of people who were being spoken of to potentially maybe show interest in being on the board. This came out on MMA Junkie, and that was a leak of information. So Lucas Middlebrook, Nick Diaz's lawyer, and a big pillar of that association, and Leslie Smith, one of the earliest people to throw their hands up in support of it, they both up and left. So it really depends. And then you've got obviously the MMAAA, and they've been battling for a very long time. The biggest thing that stands out to me is where you've got the PFA with Jeff Boris. I mean, that's an agent, and he's going to have to, and is still trying to convince fighters to come onto his side. Then you've got guys like in the MMAAA, like Nate Quarry and Kung Lee and John Fitch, that are all part of this lawsuit, which is currently ongoing. And they are sort of guys who, they don't have as much to lose because they're not in the UFC. They're either retired or they're not in the UFC, so they can't really suffer too many consequences as far as their career trajectory. They can suffer consequences of losing money through, going to court and things like that, but they don't have as much to lose as far as active careers. In this one, the big thing that stands out is the massive names. Guys like Tim Kennedy, GSP, all right, maybe they're not quite as touchable by the UFC. Maybe they don't need the UFC as much as some of the other guys, but I mean, Cowboy Cerrone, we've heard how much he likes to spend money on toys and things. I mean, I don't know the guy, but he doesn't sound like a guy who's really saved up that much money. I think he's a guy who needs to fight. He's also pretty close to a title shot at welterweight, so he needs the UFC to grant him that and, favor him in that sense. TJ Dillashaw, he's been going on for a long time, and rightfully so, about how he deserves the next title shot. He needs to be in favor with the UFC. Cain Velasquez, same position. If he beats Verdum, he should theoretically be fighting for a title. I mean, the UFC can deny all these guys these things. The point is, when you have guys with so much to lose and they stand up and they say, hey, we're taking on the UFC, we're taking this thing head on, it basically shows a lot of the other fighters that say, hey, this isn't an agent, these aren't guys who have left the company, these are current guys who are standing up and we can join with them too. You heard people like Ian McCall, he was on the 2-hour conference call. I feel like it's not as secretive as when the PFA and the MMAAA launched. I mean, people aren't really lurking in the shadows quite as much. People are sort of showing their support a lot more. This thing feels a lot bigger. And I feel like as far as gaining the fighters' trust, they don't have to work as hard because they are the fighters and they are big names.
Damon, earlier on in this program, Tim Kennedy said that he had an outpouring of contacts. He thinks almost 100 people or so have contacted him. That was in a very, very short time. A lot of fighters reaching out to him to ask questions, find out what's going on. And the plan is to every week release new names that have joined the association, let people know that they're a part of it. I mean, do you believe that one of the strongest suits of this association is the fact that it could possibly hold a lot of current UFC fighters and some big names as well?
It's possible, and I don't want to eat up too much of your show talking about this. I could talk about it for about a half hour. I took like 20 minutes of my own podcast talking about this, and I think I still had more to say. A couple things I would say is I think this association made a bigger splash than any of the others because you had 5 very well-known fighters. I mean, you had 3 former UFC champions, a legit pay-per-view draw in Georges St-Pierre, a guy like Donald Cowboy Cerrone, who's a big draw and a fan favorite, and a guy like Tim Kennedy, who I think everybody has just a tremendous amount of respect for in this industry. So that's a good thing. I think adding Bjorn Rebney didn't help them at all. I think that ended up getting a lot of negative attention, which was not necessary. I understand the need for, that kind of insider knowledge of somebody that was, maybe not fair to fighters during his time as a promoter. So maybe he knows better, I guess. But here's the thing. Here's what they're going to run into with this organization. On the positive side, since they've made their announcement, we've seen on Twitter a ton of fighters. I saw a few fighters on Twitter immediately being like, "I want more information. Let me hit you up after the fight. I want to talk to you about this. I want to find out what's going on." That's good. That's positive. You're going to get people on board. And then you have another situation like this week where Carla Esparza is talking about selling her Harley Davidson because 2 years after winning a UFC title, she's broke. Now, we can sit here and complain and say she turned down a fight with Claudia Gadelha. We can sit here and say, yeah, she spent $1,000 on a Sunday, which I think is one of the dumbest arguments you can make against a fighter spending some money. But 2 years after winning a UFC championship, I don't care what she did. 2 years later, as long as she didn't just fritter her money away on ridiculous things, I think a UFC champion should make enough money in that one fight to not have to worry about being financially strapped 2 years later. That's me. That's just what I think the fighters deserve. So that's good for them. So those are both positives. But on the negative side, they said they're not forming a union. They said they're going to be an association. And I listened to an interview with Lucas Middlebrook where he talked about this. Without being a union, you don't get federal support. You can't get the government to intervene to actually make, a labor agreement. I mean, that's what's happened in other sports. So if you're not a union, you're basically just going to try to force their hand with the fighters. You're going to try to sign up enough fighters to where it's all going to be an agreement. Now, that's great. And I think that's awesome. And I think it's awesome that, Tim Kennedy said 100 people have already, are interested. Maybe another 100 are going to sign on. But guess what? Ultimately, a lot of those fighters, as much as I hate to say this, I'm just being honest, are replaceable. Because a lot of those undercard fighters are not people that are bringing people to the arenas anyways. They're not the people who are being paid to see on pay-per-view. You need a Conor McGregor. You need a Ronda Rousey. You need, the champions. I mean, listen, Cain Velasquez may be the best heavyweight in the world. He just doesn't hold the belt right now, but he doesn't hold the belt right now. So guess what? You need Stipe Miocic on board. You need Tyron Woodley on board. You need Jose Aldo on board. You need people with those titles who are willing to stand up and say, I'm not going to fight unless you get this fixed for everybody. Without that, you start to lose some of your leverage. And then ultimately, it really just comes down to the one thing they said they really didn't want to do, which was a labor strike. They all said they didn't want to do that. And guess what? As much as fighters want more money, they want more benefits, most of the fighters on the UFC roster are living, fight to fight. They're not making enough money right now to, sit out for a year or sit out for 6 months, on a strike, things like that. So these are all problems they're going to run into. And I don't know that they necessarily have a solution for these things right now. And I think not being a union is a mistake, because then at that point, at least on the federal level in the United States, you get the support of the federal government to intervene and step in. They're not going to have that as an association. Maybe it's because what I believe to be true, which is CAA, the other organization, the big, rival to WME IMG. I think they have a hand in funding this. That's just my own conspiracy theory. And there may be some kind of, what's the word? Like, just kind of some kind of a problem with doing that and actually being a union. I know that there's rules about who can donate money to a union or who can fund a union. Maybe that plays into it. I don't know. But like I said, I think it's a good idea, and I support 110% the fighters getting paid more money. I think they absolutely deserve a bigger piece of the pie. They deserve benefits. They deserve pensions. They deserve health insurance. 110% I support that. I just can't say 100% for certain that this is going to be the way to fix it.
What I'm curious, Damon, and I want to ask you, because you seem like you've got your head wrapped around this really well, and obviously you've dedicated a lot of time to sort of, not only talking about it, but checking this out. If they do get a certain number of fighters, like Tim Kennedy's talking about, hundreds of fighters that he needs to get back to, if they, and there's around about 500 or so fighters on the roster, 500-600, so if they can get, say, 300 or 400 and get the majority of the roster, and that's a big if, that's a big hypothetical, do you think it sort of helps swing things their way? Because even though majority of those fighters may not be the biggest draws, like the Rouseys, like the McGregors, like the champions and things like that, but if you're the UFC, you still need to build fight cards. Sure, people may tune in for Conor McGregor, but if you're sponsors, you still need 4, 5, or however many millions hours you need to build up. Like cards like today, which had horrendous pacing, but that still means that a lot of ads get played during those events, and you need those undercard fighters in order to play those ads. Do you think if they have enough fighters sort of signed up to this association, it can sort of start to chip away and work things in their favor?
It's possible. It's definitely possible. I mean, when you get to those kind of numbers, the majority of fighters, and if they're willing to stand up as a group and say, we're not fighting without a collective bargaining agreement, then it's possible. But once again, I think they're making a mistake by not becoming a union, because again, your power over the organization, your power against the UFC is really null and void if you're not a union, because then at that point, the federal government isn't going to get involved. I mean, there's a hearing here in the United States on Tuesday in the Congress where they're having a hearing about mixed martial arts. The first time I can remember in history that mixed martial arts is being heard before the U.S. Congress. That's a big deal. Don't forget also the new incoming president, Donald Trump. Not going to sit here and say he's in the pocket of anybody, but we can't ignore the fact that him and Dana White are good, close personal friends, and Ari Emanuel, the owner of the UFC, was his agent. I mean, he had a private meeting with the president after he became president. So, I mean, those are two pretty powerful guys. And Donald Trump has never been a big union supporter. He's never been, throughout his history as a business owner, has never been a big union supporter. So these are problems they could run into at the federal level, but at least they would have somebody willing to fight for them. Maybe, I mean, if this got big enough and huge enough, I mean, maybe they get a really prominent, a really prominent politician like a Bernie Sanders or somebody that's willing to stand up and say, hey, this is wrong. This should not be going on. And, these fighters deserve a bigger piece of the pie, and that brings the spotlight on the sport, and it kind of forces the UFC to reevaluate how they're doing business. But right now, I don't know that any of that's going to happen, because ultimately, if this doesn't go in front of a federal, situation where it's legally a union, things like that, I just don't know. Like I said, I hope so. I mean, if you get 300 fighters on board, could you cause a strike and cause a show to get canceled or something crazy like that? Yeah, but ultimately, if you're under contract to the UFC, guess what? You don't fight. They just extend your contract. I mean, that's also a problem. So again, there's a lot of issues that could be going on with something like this. I hope it succeeds, but I don't know. Like I said, right now, I'm very skeptical, I guess I should say, about the long-term effects of what this will have.
It's going to be interesting. It's kind of like the quiet before the storm. I'm waiting to see what the UFC's response to this is going to be, and no doubt about it, we'll be talking about it in the next few weeks. But guys, we're out of time. So Damon, thank you so much for coming on the program, guys. Damon Martin is a king amongst men. Make sure to check out his work on Fox Sports. He does an amazing job. Also check out nerdcoremovement.com and his amazing podcast. Damon, what's coming up that you want fans to look out for in the coming week?
Well, this week coming up on my own podcast, I got Max Holloway stopping by to talk about his fight coming up at UFC 206. I have a feature on him, a couple features on him coming out this week. A big feature on my buddy Matt Brown, my former podcast co-host. He'll be coming up this weekend, so I'll have that coming out. And then if you're a nerd, you're a geek, you're into nerd culture, check out Nerdcore Movement, because this week is the finale of Westworld. I don't know if you guys have checked out that show, one of my favorite shows. The finale of that show is this week, and I'll be doing a big recap on that just to throw out a little bit of my nerd stuff as well.
Yeah. I tried watching this show. Didn't know what was going on. I licked myself and then I walked out the room. But maybe if I listen to your recap, I'll get back into it and check it out. So there you guys go. Another great episode. Big thanks to Tim Kennedy. Big thanks to Ryan Bader. And big thanks to Cole Miller. Big thanks to Luke Thomas, who was on the program as well. And of course, yourself, Damon Martin. We'll be back next week with another episode of Submission Radio. Until then, be safe and we'll catch you then.